I can set the recording. All right, so we're recording. Welcome back. We're making a transition today from reading Herodotus to reading.
Did we lose Stephen?
Oh, we froze Stephen.
Yep.
He froze again. And it's not windy today. Or not yet. It's supposed to get really windy, but so far not.
Dog's been pulling the wires.
So do we find this a little bit more difficult to read than Herodotus?
Yeah.
Different for sure.
Well, that wasn't fun.
Right.
Yeah. Where'd you go?
I know. I started right up and lost power. Around my house, I use Wi-Fi, but I turn off every other device, the Wi-Fi connection. And that has worked so far. So this is unusual that all of a sudden I lost power. The recording is continuing, so it continued on through breaking down. If it happens again, please continue on with the discussion. I've figured out how I can catch up to you, how I can reconnect rather quickly. So anyway, as I was saying, we are making a transition from Herodotus to Aeschylus. And there are 3 plays in.
There are 3 plays.
He froze again. Oh no.
Yes.
Morning, guys.
Hey, good morning, Joseph.
Morning, Joseph.
Morning.
Joseph, hi, Karen. Stephen's frozen again.
Seems to freeze whenever somebody new comes on.
Oh no. Oh,
It's
well,
it's your fault, Karen. No.
I know. Everything is.
No.
All right. I gotta figure out something. Do you guys all see that glare behind me?
Yeah,
Uh-huh.
Yes.
Yep.
that's your window.
It's been irritating me. Because we're selling the house, we took down the curtains to watch them.
Oh, wow. Yep.
Haven't gotten them back up yet. Actually, haven't gotten them washed yet. But
We'll get dark soon.
I've got somewhat of the same situation. I just put up shears on the blinds. I'm right in front of a window upstairs.
oh, okay. We can go for the slant look. There we go.
You just take one of your folders on the window.
I'm just gonna rely on the sun to do its thing and go down.
Just open the window.
Yeah, there you go.
A little too cold.
Not cold. It's not super cold here, but it's our one medium nice day where we're actually going to get a little bit of sun this week.
Where are you located, Karen?
I'm in north of Boston,
North of Boston, okay.
Oh, wow.
but we're having miserable, but not in New Hampshire. This is the one time of year where I wish I live in New Hampshire. I think it would be so entertaining. I had a rehearsal this morning with a guy who lives in New Hampshire, and he said that they had 4 Warren people show up at their doors yesterday.
Oh, wow.
I was like, wow, that is some personal attention.
Right. Did they have the ballot with them so they help her fill it out or him fill it out?
And, no, he didn't vote for her either, I know. But they're just trying, I think they're like trying to say, please, please vote for us. Mm-hmm. You don't really get that in Massachusetts because do you get that, Joe?
No.
Yeah.
I mean, once in a while somebody comes by, but mostly it's just annoying phone calls.
Yeah.
You're on mute. You need to open up your microphone, Steve. Oh, yes.
You're on mute, Stephen.
Thank you very much. You know what? I found a device in the house that was still connected to my Wi-Fi. So hopefully that's going to solve the problem. Whatever y'all were saying about me, it was recorded. So I'll be able to hear what you said later. Welcome back. So we're turning to Aeschylus, the dramatist, and the three plays, Agamemnon, Libation Bearers, and Eumenides. Those of you from Boston, you know the Eumenides joke, don't you?
Oh, I
From
can
Click
just-
and Clack, the Tappet Brothers. Do you know the joke?
I don't.
It's Euripides, Eumenides. Right, that's the Click and Clack, those auto mechanic, the guys who had the radio show,
Oh yeah.
right?
They're
Um,
They're
I used to love those
here.
guys.
okay, we'll leave them aside then, and let's turn to Agamemnon. I may have made a mistake last week in suggesting that somehow we only talk about the first half, but I have to stick with that. That's what we said. So we'll talk about the first half. Did I say that? I
Sort
said,
of, but everybody
Yes.
read the whole thing.
Yeah, I
did
read
everybody read the whole thing?
Yeah.
You said
It
you
doesn't
read
make
the whole
sense if you
thing.
don't.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you read the whole thing. Very good. So there's going to be no spoils for anybody. So we can talk about the whole thing in both weeks. I think that it makes better sense to do it that way.
I just
yeah.
did this because the farther I got into it, it made a little more sense, but I was hoping by the end of it would make a lot of sense, but I'm still
Right.
kind of iffy on it.
Yes, it still doesn't make complete sense. And so one of the things we have to think about is that this is a play that's connected with two other plays. So it has three parts. It's the trilogy. So Nicholas, maybe we're going to have to save that question of what sense does it make overall until we get through all three parts. Although wouldn't you say there's a beginning and a middle and an end in this drama? Yeah, so I think it does have its ending to it, so that the play could stand on its own if we wanted to. But let me not go too far into the analysis, and let me just open it up to you. And so what are your impressions now of this play, Agamemnon? What are your initial thoughts, initial responses to it? Or I could ask another question. Tell me which one you like, or pick up on any one you want. We're now reading a different genre. We're now reading drama. I assume that many of you have experience in drama, not directly as actors, maybe some of you do, but I assume that many of you have watched plays before. I've seen, a few in my lifetime. So what is it about drama that is maybe distinct? James, get us started. Yeah.
Well, I've often struck that both in the case of drama and in the case of film, it seems like the essence of it is somewhere around the idea there's a bunch of people in a room watching something. So there's this notion of we're kind of watching a story happen, seems to be an essential part of drama. And I noticed that this play starts in that way, where we actually have a watchman first who's watching for something. And that reminded me of the way that Hamlet starts too, where we start on with the watchman up on the wall, and they're waiting for the ghost to come again. But that whole notion of, okay, we're sort of just outside the action and kind of watching other people have action seems to be common to the way this play opens, the way the Hamlet opens, and the way that kind of drama and film sort of work, is that we're watching stuff happen.
Yeah, very nice. That's a great start. Anybody else want to pick up on that?
I was completely floored with this Helen of Troy and the fact that there was a 10-year war started over ripping her off, and then I get a little bit farther into it, and it leaves me wondering if she didn't go willingly,
Right.
And then they sacrifice a daughter, and I mean, it's just like, What
Yeah.
happened to me was, as I was reading this, I was in front of the computer and I had probably 10 tabs going, trying to figure out who all these people were and how they all fitted in.
Oh,
Once I
interesting.
did that, I got farther into it.
Oh, that's interesting. Thank you for telling me that, Nicholas. That might be something that let me test this out with you all. So could I have given you an introduction to Agamemnon before letting you loose to read it? Would that have done anything for you? Karen, go ahead, respond to that.
Well, I think it depends. If you've read the Iliad and the Odyssey, then you would know who these people are. So it depends on if you've read those or not.
Yeah.
And I have read them. So but now that I think about it, if I didn't know that story beforehand, I would have been very confused.
Yeah, and to James's point, if we are in the audience when this play Agamemnon is being performed, we would know a whole lot about the characters and the action before the first, before the curtains ever open. Right? As, shall we say, as a Greek audience, which Aeschylus is assuming, we would know a whole lot. So, Nicholas, I think that you put your finger on something that's really important, and that is, what does Aeschylus expect? So back to James's question, what does Aeschylus expect from his watchmen, from his audience? Right? There's the question. I think Nicholas is giving us a little bit. Nicholas, let me come back to you, and then Joseph will come down. Yeah.
I read the Iliad and the Odyssey, but it was in high school and I was taking a Latin class, so it was translation, and I translated it, but beyond that, I didn't get any. I mean, I just wanted to get through the class. I realized halfway through Latin that this was not something I really like, but I did go to a more modern version, Troy with Brad Pitt and Diane Kruger, and the people are the same, although it's a little more. I should have done like a couple other people and actually went to YouTube and looked at some of the older versions, but it worked. I just had to get up to speed on who the players were.
Good. Joseph, come on in.
Yeah, I also needed some context for the stories because I hadn't read the Iliad, and the story of Troy was only sort of familiar to me through, I guess, cultural references, but I'd never fully absorbed myself in that story. So I read Agamemnon. As a separate point, I read this play at the same time that I read Herodotus' histories. And what I found useful there is I found at times the histories were a bit of a grind for me. And this was a nice, the drama of the play offset it nicely. So when I was having a bit of trouble with the histories, I could switch across to Agamemnon, and suddenly I was enthused and energetic, and I could switch back as well when the time was right. But the third thing that I did for the context is a little bit like Nicholas. There's a play on YouTube. There is the movie on YouTube. There is the Brad Pitt film, but I didn't watch that one. I have seen it before, but there's another one that's really good. It's a British one from about 2003, and it's completely free, and it's on YouTube. It was a TV series, and I think it's more. I think it follows this. It presumably follows the story a little bit more literally to the original, and that just helped me understand who Agamemnon was and who Paris was, and it gave me a bit of context for Clytemnestra as well.
So Joseph, the YouTube play, the British production, is that the Trojan War? Is it the play Agamemnon? What is it?
I think it's called Helen of Troy.
Oh, okay. All right.
And
I am so behind the curve on this. Y'all are talking about seeing stuff on YouTube and all that kind of. I don't do it. I mean, I don't do anything on YouTube. I don't know this stuff. Occasionally, I'll listen to a song my kids tell me about. Amazing that all this stuff is available on YouTube. So I don't need all these books here in my study. Doris, please come on in.
Yeah, to that, in getting the context, I did watch it on YouTube, but I actually watched the Greek play so that they were in the traditional with the mask, so there was no expression. And it was done in basically black and white when the chorus came in and went out. So it gave you more of the feeling for the Greek play.
Wow, that's amazing. Y'all are amazing me really here. I am such an old school kind of person, I guess. I better get with it. I better get with the modern times here. Okay, look, so let's fill in. Let's make sure we fill in the context. Anybody want to tell us what your understanding is before you even open the play? I mean, however you acquired your understanding, what is your understanding when you open up this play, Agamemnon? Yeah, Doris, get started.
Well, I did go back to figure out who the players were in this. And so it really was from when Pelops had the two sons, Atreus and Thyestes, and then Atreus became king, and then the Thyestes went in exile, then came back, and he butchered his Thyestes' children and ate them, so that
Aegisthus or Aegisthus
was Thyestes' son, and he was kind of revenge. So then Agamemnon was Atreus' son, and he assumed kingship. And when he went off to war, Aegisthus came and bedded his wife. And so when they came back, the Aegisthus and Clytemnestra, the wife, had made a pact to kill Agamemnon, which the play ends up with the killing of Agamemnon and the Cassandra, the mistress that he brought back from Priam.
Right. So Doris, you're seeing this going all the way back to the children of Pelops and the animosity that takes place between Thyestes and Atreus. Wow. Yeah, very good. Okay, Bonnie, what else?
Well, it goes back even farther because Tantalus was the mortal son of Zeus, and Tantalus invited all the gods down for a dinner, and Tantalus killed his only son, Pelops, and the gods realized that and they wouldn't eat it, and they brought Pelops back to life. So, I mean, the story, the whole curse goes back all the way to, I think, Tantalus.
Wow. My goodness. Did everyone go into that background, that much background?
Yeah, I did. With all my tabs. And
yeah.
The farther I got into it, the more, eventually I was going between tabs and the book was just laying on my desk. I was going, wow, what a bunch of backstabbers.
Curtis, you didn't go into that far.
No, I didn't, and I have very little background in this part of history, so it's all new to me. It's very distant, I would say.
Ah.
But I'm doing the best that I can to keep up.
Good. And so, Curtis, you can give us. You might be actually a good reference point for us, in the sense that what is on the page and what And then for others who have done the background, they might be able to say, well, what seems to be in the background that is lurking between the lines of the page? So that space between the words on the page and what may be assumed by Aeschylus and his readers that fall between the lines on the page. That's a reading position that we can have here, or we can play with a little bit as we work with this play. Yeah, good. Anybody else before we jump into it?
What got me at the very end was Helen went back to her former husband and lived happily ever after, according to what I read.
You mean Helen and Menelaus?
Right. I mean, they just got back. All this stuff happened. All the backstabbing, killing, eating of children and stuff, and frolicking with gods and stuff. And then all of a sudden, after she did all this stuff, and it seemed like she went willingly, everything was done, and she went back to her former husband and carried on with life like it never even happened.
Wow. Never mind the 10 years of war that went on.
Yeah, I'm thinking all this stuff is laid to waste, and they ransacked cities and did all sorts of stuff, and she just, well, okay, I'll come back and everything's okay.
It does raise questions, doesn't it? But for us, that is beyond the play. The play deals directly with Agamemnon returning home, or it opens in Argos. So let's come directly to the play. So the curtains pull back, and we have the watchman, and so let's set the scene here. What's going on? What's the scene at the beginning of this play?
Well, the version I saw on YouTube, the watchman is at this wall and, waiting. It's becoming early morning, and he's waiting for the sign of the fire to indicate that Agamemnon has taken Troy.
Good. Karen, what else?
I just, I had never really thought about it before, but the fire top scene in the Lord of the Rings, when they send word from Gondor for help from Rohan, and there are all these mountains and the fire's lighting up, then
yeah.
Okay.
The signal fires, right? That's a well-known ancient means to let people know what's going on. Remember, we saw in Herodotus a different means, and that was the Pony Express, right? Where you got the ponies that go from place to place that could get a message there rather quickly. But the signal fires can get there. It's amazing how quickly they can get there. Those of you familiar with the history of Judaism, it was the Babylonian community communicating with the Jerusalem community over when the Sabbath would begin or when any of the major festivals would begin. And it was once again this signal fire that would be viewed from one station to the next until it reached its designation. Yeah. Joseph, what else? Yep, you got it? Okay. Yeah, go ahead. You're good? Okay. But let's get the basics. This is Agamemnon. Who is Agamemnon?
He's a king.
Yes, king of what?
Jeez.
Jump in, anybody.
He's king of Argos.
Argos.
He's also
Right.
the leader of the Greek troops,
What?
the
Right.
whole expedition.
Yeah. Agamemnon is really looked to as, I don't know, what do we want to say? The chief war strategist, the chief of staff, the head general, who knows, from our Argos, but he's the sister-in-law. Helen is his sister-in-law. Menelaus is his brother, who is king at a different city. So you might want to, I might want to ask the question, why isn't this the story of Menelaus's return instead of the story of Agamemnon's return? How would you answer that? Why is this? We can't answer it completely, but what is more compelling about to Aeschylus about the Agamemnon story than Menelaus?
Because he kills his daughter.
Oh, so Bonnie, and who is his daughter?
Oh, yeah, what's her name?
Iphigenia.
Iphigenia. He kills her to appease the gods for the bad weather.
Yeah.
And then that sets off his wife, and that's the whole.
Oh. So that makes for better drama. The return of Helen to Menelaus. That's not a good enough story. We have to have the child sacrifice.
Well, isn't in this story we don't know what's happened yet to Menelaus? Don't they say he's been blown off course, and you don't know if he's survived or.
Right. We don't know. Whereas when you read the Odyssey, so you got the Iliad and the Odyssey. When you read that, the Odyssey is what really gives us the end of the Trojan War and all of the things that happen after the Trojan War. The Iliad doesn't really give us the end of it all. It doesn't even, the Trojan horse is not even in the Iliad. Wait, I hope I'm not giving anything away. Did you know Troy loses and there's a Trojan horse there? Okay, good. It's not even in the Iliad. We only learn about it from the Odyssey, maybe a few other extravagant sources or something like that. And we learn about all the others that are coming back. We also learn about Agamemnon coming back in the Odyssey as well. And so some of you, when we get to this, as we work our way through it, if you're familiar with that and you want to bring that in, feel free to bring that in as well. Okay. Joe, you want to come in on some of this?
I don't have much to say yet, but.
Okay. All right. James, come on back. Yeah.
Well, your question about, Agamemnon's story versus Menelaus' story, I think that's pretty interesting because just a little bit of the backstory there is, Helen was, supposedly the most beautiful woman and all the men wanted to marry her. So there was an arrangement that whoever she ends up marrying, everybody else, before she makes her choice, everyone else pledges to sort of defend the husband. Otherwise, people would have it in for him. So everyone makes this pact. And that's why when she goes or is taken, whatever, to Troy, all these other, commanders and heroes and everybody kind of is compelled to join the war effort. So thinking about this play that way makes me think about it as, kind of we're watching a story about how we get drawn into other people's drama, right? Because it's really Menelaus's drama, but his brother and all of their colleagues kind of get drawn into this drama, and other people get drawn into theirs as well. So that really brings out for me just the intertwined nature of the drama of our neighbors and colleagues and friends, and how that shapes our lives.
Oh, very good, James. Joseph, what else?
I'll just add to what James is saying, but I have to be careful to what extent I'm injecting what I've seen in films. But what the backstory seems to also that gets played out in other sources and probably here is this rivalry as well between the two brothers. Helen is a clear source of rivalry, perhaps as James was alluding to. But what you find is that Agamemnon, he really is the alpha man in any situation, and Menelaus is the weaker of the two, and he defers. And it's not just with respect to the rivalry between Agamemnon and Menelaus. Agamemnon is the alpha in any situation. He's the dominator. And I think that's ultimately epitomized in how driven he is ultimately epitomized in the fact that he's prepared to kill his own daughter brutally.
Oh, interesting. But listen, I don't want us to lose track here. I mean, it's not, Menelaus is not Paris, right? Yeah, okay, so you know what I mean when I refer to that? Paris is seen as somewhat, effeminate, maybe. Menelaus is still quite the man. He reminds me of the brothers that lived down the street from me when I was a little kid, Danny Jones and Donnie Jones. Everybody in the family had DJ, by the way. Pick your poison. Which one do you want to mess with? Joseph, go ahead.
That's why you've got to be very careful about injecting film into this, because in the film that I watched, Menelaus is effeminate. Agamemnon is alpha, and oddly enough, Paris is also quite masculine and handsome. Whereas I understand that's quite a contrast with how he's portrayed in the original sources.
Okay, all right, yeah, you're right. So we got to make that distinction. Okay, let's do this. Let's bring our focus in. Let's zoom in now. Agamemnon. So we'll set the stage here. Agamemnon is there. We open the scene in Argos. They're waiting for the signal fire from the Trojan War. It's been 9+ years of them being gone. While they're gone, Clytemnestra is apparently, and I'll say apparently maintaining the estate and the kingdom back at Argos. And the watchmen are keeping watch, not only for the signal fire, but maybe keeping watch of Clytemnestra, maybe keeping watch of the palace, maybe keeping watch over the city as well. So in what sense, we got to think about in what sense are these watchmen watching? And maybe we can get a little bit about that. All right, so let me add in a few more things. So there's Clytemnestra and Agamemnon. Aegisthus is, he turns out to be her, Clytemnestra's paramour in some sense. We'll have to figure that out. There is, what comes up is the sacrifice of Iphigenia, which occurs at the beginning, before the war ever gets started, and it's Agamemnon. Iphigenia is the daughter to Clytemnestra and Agamemnon. And so the sacrifice of Iphigenia is always there, and it's Clytemnestra's, what seems to be irritating, bothering Clytemnestra quite a bit. We have the watchman, and then we have the chorus. Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
Well, I sort of had a question when I was reading this. I clearly read too many romance novels, but how was she just like an angry person? I mean, being the sister of the world's most beautiful woman must be difficult in some ways. I mean, anybody would be mad that if their husband killed their daughter, but she's so overwhelmingly angry, and maybe that's just entirely appropriate for the situation.
Okay, good. It's a good question. What do y'all think? Is her anger over the top, misplaced, too much?
There's another part to her character, which is that she always tells the truth, but no one believes her.
No, that's Cassandra.
Oh, that's Cassandra. Sorry.
Right. Remember, so Cassandra is the young woman, shall we say, part of the booty that Agamemnon brings home. And unfortunately, that term has morphed into meaning pretty much the same thing there. And so she is the young woman that he brings home, part of the spoils of war And she is a prophetess of some kind. So we'll get to her. She comes very late in the play. We'll get to her a little bit. Okay, but Karen is suggesting that Clytemnestra's anger is, I don't know, for lack of a better term, extreme, over the top, something like that. Anybody want to pick up on that?
Would you say it was, she was how can I put this? Architect of vengeance?
Yeah.
I mean, it's just, she was very angry. I read where somebody prayed to Apollo to appease her vengeance, and that she was wont to take it out on everything and everyone.
So Nicholas, what is she avenging?
From what I've been able to read, she's avenging the fact that Helen has entered her palace, for lack of a better word. She's an outsider. She doesn't have any choice about it. I think she's like it was stated, she was very angry, and she set about trying to avenge her anger. The whole thing just seems to center around two women. One extremely beautiful, the other one had a place of importance, and it looks like she doesn't want Helen to usurp her. She's already got the beauty. She doesn't want her to usurp her place, to knock her out of her seat at the table.
We certainly have to include another woman, and that is Clytemnestra's daughter and Agamemnon's daughter, Iphigenia, right? Mm-hmm. She doesn't have, she does speak. They do take us, they do give us a flashback to the events which lead to her sacrifice. But it sounds to me, Nicholas, like you're suggesting that Clytemnestra is angry also, that her anger is somewhat jealousy, or that her anger is directed towards Helen because Helen is the cause of all this war and the reason why her husband Agamemnon has to leave and all that kind of stuff.
Yes, I think so. I mean, I might be wrong, but I'm thinking that this woman, she looks as, not only is she the most beautiful, but she's a usurper, and to basically the daughter was sacrificed. Doesn't say here, I might have read it wrong, but I'm thinking that somewhere
Clytemnestra.
Okay, Clytemnestra. I'm having a hard time with the names.
Yeah, these are tough names. They're not easy ones.
I think that she had more to do with the sacrifice than meets the eye. I think in some sense she may be a more central character than is portrayed.
Are you saying Iphigenia or Clytemnestra?
Clytemnestra.
Okay. All right.
I think she had more to do with this. Maybe I'm reading this wrong, but
we'll get to that. Karen, go ahead.
But I'm pretty sure in the Iliad that Clytemnestra begs her husband to spare her daughter's life. Is that right?
I don't think it's in the Iliad. Okay. Yeah, it's not in the. Joseph, go ahead.
No, finish off Karen's point, and then I'll come to a point.
Yeah, no, it's not in the Iliad, but it is here it's in the Agamemnon.
Okay.
We hear from Iphigenia in Agamemnon. Of course, there's another play, The Death of Iphigenia. That's another play as well, and we hear more about it there. But here we only hear a little bit from her. Joseph, go ahead. Or go ahead, Karen, follow up.
Well, I thought the other thing that was making her mad was Cassandra, not Helen.
Okay, but But she doesn't learn about Cassandra until at the very end. Isn't she angry long before she ever learns about Cassandra?
But she also says at some point earlier in the play that I still love him or something, Agamemnon, which I thought was weird. It was.
You mean it's weird for a woman to love her own husband?
Well, and then kill him 20 pages later. Yeah.
Remember Herodotus? There once was a man who loved his own wife. Go figure. So Karen, from your point of view, Clytemnestra loves Agamemnon.
Well, no, I think he hates him and loves him. But then,
okay, sure, there can be mixed emotions.
Yeah, but then when Cassandra comes along, that's just like the last straw.
Well, of course, right. But before Cassandra is the death of her daughter, Iphigenia. Okay, Joseph, come on back in.
Well, a couple of things, 3 things. I think if Helen's probably a contributing factor to that dynamic, but Helen wasn't killed by Clytemnestra. So I think the people she killed probably says a lot about the people that most antagonized her. The second point is, I can't be politically correct about these things. Your questions invite them. So we say, hell hath no fury like a woman scorned. And if you were to pick a character that epitomizes that, it would have to be Clytemnestra. And the final point is, we did, in one of our earlier discussions, we were looking at all of these male kings and how brutal they were, and we were looking at some of the women characters in some of our texts, including a lot of the ones in Crime and Punishment. And I think the suggestion was, well, wouldn't it be better if maybe some women ruled the world and we wouldn't have this brutal violence? But the response back was, and I think you said it, Stephen, think of how measured women are when their children are at threat. Whether it would be a more civilized world or not. And I think with Clytemnestra's character, if she does represent the way that the world would be run, if it were run by women, it would still be a bloody place.
Doris, come on in.
Yeah, I didn't pick up from the play, from reading what was here in Agamemnon, the hatred for Helen. For Helen. I saw it more that, she loved her husband. He went off to war. He was gone for an extended period. And I saw it more as a justice took advantage of that absence and came, and he was able to woo her and to, lay out the faults of Agamemnon. So I saw it more as, and then, once Iphigenia was killed, the daughter was killed, that just fueled the, her dislike for her husband, because in a couple spots, she does say something about her husband and loving him, but I think that it was, to me, it was more, she did love him at one point, but that no longer is. And I thought also she was showing that she loved him to make sure he came home and that he came in and followed what she wanted him to do in order to do the assassination.
To exact her vengeance on him for some reason. Look, let's try to get a sense of some of the timing here. As far as we know, Iphigenia is sacrificed long before Clytemnestra and Aegisthus are involved. Does everyone see it that way, or does anybody see it differently? So that, there's the call to war, there's the guest host violation, Paris was visiting from Troy. He's visiting at Argos. Something happens, with Paris and Helen. Next thing you know, Helen is off on the sea and she's heading to Troy. And the people back in the Peloponnesus, along with all the rest of the Greeks, remember Herodotus? All the Greeks, remember the allies that they're looking for? We didn't get a whole lot of discussion about that for the Trojan War. Seems like everybody's united. They're heading off for the Trojan War. Agamemnon seems to be the head of at least of the Argive contingency that's going off to war. They encounter some bad weather, no wind, no way to get across the Aegean to Troy, and apparently the gods need to be appeased. So Iphigenia is sacrificed. What did they want? What do the gods want? Well, in these stories, what do gods always want? They want a virgin woman. And of course, it's always going to be a young virgin woman. And so Agamemnon happens to have one. And he sacrifices her. So that seems to be maybe, if not the first thing, at least the most pressing thing that sets off Clytemnestra. Now he's gone for 9 or plus years. They're waiting for a signal to hear the end of the war. In the meantime, Clytemnestra and Aegisthus have gotten together, and apparently they are co-regents back at Argos, Agamemnon's city-state. Does that make sense for the setting of the play as a whole? Did I leave anything out that you would want to add there? The other things we talked about are sort of lingering in the background, but I think that's the setting for the whole. Karen, go ahead.
Well, I feel like I remember this, but maybe I don't because I was wrong about Clytemnestra begging. But I feel like Agamemnon had to, if he didn't make the sacrifice, he wouldn't be able to be the leader of the group anymore. His status was entirely dependent on him sacrificing his daughter. And not anybody else's daughter, but his daughter.
That's a really important question. So the question that Karen is raising here is, what was the motivation for sacrificing Iphigenia? Is it in any way justifiable? And if so, doesn't that have bearing on Clytemnestra's response to the killing? So if there's justification for the sacrifice of Iphigenia, regardless of what we think about it, if within the play, within the culture, there is some kind of justification for the sacrifice of Iphigenia, that then raises question about the direction, the focus of Clytemnestra's anger and what she might be up to. Go ahead, James.
Well, yeah, that's interesting because as I understand kind of the logic, if there is, of sacrifice, it's sort of an expectation of reciprocity, right? We're going to do something that the gods would like so that they do something good for us, right? So yeah. Whether that's, restoring the balance of life to the universe, because you always have death to get life, or whatever it is, there's this expectation of reciprocity. And as I understand how that worked in Greece at the time, that was sort of more or less accepted, that you sort of have this for that with the gods to change the way things are going to go. So from that point of view, it's not unreasonable at all. I mean, as like a modern person and as a parent, it's horrific,
Yes. Right.
So maybe putting those two things together, it's like something about, if we're trying to influence the way that the world pushes us around, we're really doing desperate, drastic things to do that. I don't know.
And recall, for example, just to go along with you, James, what we read in Herodotus, that remember the sea battle where it starts up there at Artemisia, and the Persian ships go around, on the seaward side and get washed up against the shore, and they lose a good number of them to sort of equal out the number of ships between the Persians and the Greeks, and how the Greeks saw that as the act of the gods. so that the forces of nature are not inanimate like we think of, but rather they are animated forces that are used by the gods for the gods' purposes. And so now if there are no winds and there is a host of ships sitting in the bay waiting to take off, but there's no winds to propel them out to sea and across the Aegean, then there must be something wrong. And we have to figure out what that is and solve it so that we can get on with this rescuing of Helen. That seems to be the situation there. And I think, James, that's your point. There's this for that there. Something going on. Yeah, Joseph.
Yeah, if your question's about the justification, and you've just given me a thought, I suppose Clytemnestra didn't think Helen was worth it.
That's right. Yeah, I think that's a really good point, isn't it?
Others didn't as well. I think that's a theme. Again, I can't remember if it's in the movie or in the stories, but a lot of people were thinking she's not worth the war in Troy. And certainly from Clytemnestra's perspective, I could understand Clytemnestra thinking she's not worth the sacrifice of Clytemnestra's daughter.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Karen, go ahead.
But my question is, I mean, historically, this can't really have been a war about one woman. Usually, you know,
good.
Wars are about economics.
Good. Very good.
So.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Never really, it's never really explained by our sources. But let's think about it. Where does the war take place? Where is Troy?
Troy's in Turkey, isn't it?
Asia Minor. Yeah.
Asia Minor. But, you know, okay, Asia Minor is a big place. What part of Asia Minor?
Western.
Western. Good. Western Asia Minor is still a big place. Is that west of the Halys River? Can we narrow it down any more than that? How about Troy being the Bronze Age city that keeps guard over the Hellespont? Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that it's likely that this war could be a geopolitical war over control of the Hellespont. Troy has control of it. Maybe the city-states of the Peloponnesus, maybe the others on the other side of on the west side of the Aegean, maybe they want to control it instead of Troy. It's speculation, Karen, but at least there is some kind of geopolitical, economic reason for the war besides just Helen. But you know what? We don't have the historian that tells us that. And, you know, it's a whole lot more fun to read about a war over, you know, the abduction of a woman or perhaps the affair of young Paris and Helen. And, you know, the expectation of her return. It creates for more drama, shall we say. James, go ahead.
Yeah, it does create for drama. And it also strikes me as we talk about this that it again sort of personifies these forces that move our lives. Because maybe if the stuff that moves our lives is dry stuff like political, economical stuff, I mean, to understand kind of what really makes us do what we do, to put it in terms of the passions. I mean, maybe if it was an economic calculation, let's control the Hellespont, fine. But, you know, but that's a want, that's a passion to have that control. Maybe like, you know, the passion that someone might feel for the most beautiful woman in the world. So similarly to when in Herodotus, we talked about the gods and Herodotus saying, well, that rock, it's because the gods threw it there. I mean, if he's really giving us a history, what is he saying? And I was wondering, you know, is he saying, well, the stuff we can't explain rationally, you know, we're going to kind of project onto these forces And maybe just like you might project stuff onto the gods as doing stuff, maybe this geopolitical thing is being projected onto the passions of, you know, what someone might feel for the most beautiful woman in the world, at these drives that otherwise are hard to talk about.
Yeah, good, wonderful. Hey, look, let's get into some of it. Let's read some of it, shall we? And I think the opening lines of The Watchmen are a really good place to start. So, you know, why don't I read a little bit here? So I'm going to start at the very beginning. You know, I'll leave the time and scene there for you to read it. But here the watchmen say, "Dear gods, set me free from all the pain, the long watch I keep, 1 whole year awake, propped on my arms, crouched on the roofs of Atreus like a dog. I know the stars by heart, the armies of the night, and there in the lead, the ones that brings us snow or the crops of summer bring us all we have, our great blazing kings of the sky. I know them, when they rise and when they fall, and I know I watch for the light, the signal fire breaking out of Troy, shouting, Troy is taken. So she commands, full of her high hopes. That woman, she maneuvers like a man. And when I keep to my bed soaked in dew, and the thoughts go groping through the night, and the good dreams that used to guard my sleep, not here, it's the old comrade terror at my neck. I mustn't sleep, no," shaking himself awake. "Look alive, sentry." Let's just stop there. There's a little bit for us to chew on. What do you make of this opening statement by the Watchman?
I don't get why he says 1 whole year awake.
Okay.
Does that mean he feels like he's been awake for forever, or?
Okay.
I looked at it as he was standing his post for a year, and you know,
Yep.
he's been sitting there just waiting for something, and it's been a year. It's been a long time, and the anticipation is built up. He knows it's coming. He just doesn't know when.
Yeah. And maybe to support your observation there, Nicholas, is he speaks of the seasons of the year. I don't know the full story behind that, whether, you know, the watchmen went in cycles that, you know, I'm sure they had shifts. I don't think that he was up on the rooftop all the time, or maybe he was every night. But I'm assuming that they had different shifts and different things like that, and this was his cycle. That's as far as I got. There may be more to it than that, but I don't know.
I also got the idea that this would have been something that was extremely important, and to your point, there would have been more than one watchman, at least two.
Right.
One for the day, one for the night, so the guy could
Right.
sleep. But missing this would probably mean death. I mean, even in the modern military, sleeping on your post is probably one of the worst things you can actually do. And if you do it in a squad type formation, whether it was back in my day or nowadays, let's say Afghanistan or Iraq,
Yeah.
you're putting everybody at risk.
Right.
Everybody.
Yeah.
So sleeping is definitely a no-no, but I'm also thinking he's waiting for this this fire to be built. I mean, he's just sitting there. I mean, you know, believe me, having been on watch, it's extremely boring.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, it's not a really glamorous job, but in the end, if he were to miss it, I'm thinking that his life would be in grave danger.
Right. Without a doubt, his life would be in danger. Good. All right. What else is in this opening statement? Anybody else see anything here you want to pick up on? Yeah, Bonnie, go ahead.
When he says that woman, she maneuvers like a man,
Yeah.
I'm referring to Clytemnestra, I'm assuming.
Yeah. Yeah. Reference to Clytemnestra. That just leaps off the page. I mean, we can't let that go by, can we? We have to talk about that. Doris, were you going to talk about that?
Well, yes, that was the thing that I saw too. That was a major theme of this first
Right.
dialogue from the Watchmen, and then that's carried on later with the chorus about how she acts more like a man.
Yes. Yes. Bonnie, go ahead.
And towards the end, when it's the old comrade, terror at my neck, I took that as a foreshadowing of all the things that were going to come down on the house.
Yeah. What do you think they mean by old comrade? I mean, so it's the terror, it's the fear, the emotion?
Or you go back to the old, for lack of a better word, family curse.
Oh.
With Artreus, then Agamemnon, then what's going to happen to
Right.
Clytemnestra? That's how I took it.
Yeah. So, Bonnie, are you including within this Aegisthus?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So here we have this statement by the Watchman at the beginning. The woman, she maneuvers like a man. All right, so he's making a comparison, man to woman. We saw that in Herodotus. Remember when we saw that here is a woman like a man, and that was with Artemisia. That was something really positive. Is it positive here? Is it neutral? Is it negative? What do you think?
I took it as negative.
Yeah, I did too. I looked at it as negative, but also the fact that here's a woman who's extremely formidable, and the Watchman has picked it out. This is a woman that you do not want to cross. She's of high intelligence, and well, she moves through people, I'm assuming, like a man. There must be a commanding presence.
Okay, so Nicholas, you're hearing this maneuvers like a man as having some kind of physical presence.
Yes, I mean, even in my modern life, I've worked for important women, and they do. There is. I wouldn't typify them as man-like, but you know when
the way they carry themselves, they're confident.
Yes, you know you're in the presence of an extremely important person, and they just happen to be a woman. But in this particular time, women were more subservient. So to have somebody that a simple guard would actually pick out of a crowd and say, "Wow, she moves like a man."
Yeah.
He's actually setting the stage for this. This is a woman that you really and truly gotta watch out for.
Okay. Now we could watch out for her because of her confidence and her posture and that sort of thing. But what else could maneuvering mean?
Her revenge.
Oh, her revenge. All right. So, Bonnie, where's the maneuvering in that?
Well, she takes the lover, her maneuvering when he comes home, how she has him walk on the robes, how she maneuvers him into the temple. It's all.
But that's still yet to be seen. The Watchmen haven't seen that yet. So, in other words, the Watchmen make this observation about what they've already seen from Clytemnestra. not what we're going to see when Agamemnon comes home. Joe, and then Doris, come on in.
The sense I have is that the relationship between Clytemnestra and Aegisthus is not so very well hidden from the people in town.
Right.
And the urgency that she feels to know exactly when I have the sense that the watchman knows that there's more to that than just hoping for a victory. That she has plans and something's going to happen. So
good. Joe, let me read the last stanza from the Watchman. It's on the next page. I think in support of what you're saying. He says, just bring him home, my king. I'll take your loving hand in mine, and then the rest is silence. The ox is on my tongue. But the house and these old stones, give them a voice, and what a tale they'd tell. And so would I gladly. I speak to those who know. To those who don't know, to those who don't know, my mind's blank. I never say a word. Doris, yeah.
And to that point, the stanza that's at the top of that page, the third line down where he says, I cry for the hard times come to the house, no longer run like the great place of old. So while Agamemnon's been gone, obviously she has taken over and has totally changed the culture and the mechanism on how the palace has been run.
Yeah, very good. That's a nice little summary, nice little explanation. Maybe we could add to it the beginning of the chorus. These beginnings here, they're really important. They kind of set things up. Let's take a look at the chorus on the next page, page 105. 10 years gone, 10 to the day, our great avenger went for Priam. Menelaus and Lord Agamemnon, two kings with the power of Zeus. The twin throne, twin scepter, Atreus' sturdy yoke of sons launched Greece in 1,000 ships. Armadas cutting loose from the land, armies massed for the case, the rescue. Then there is, from within the palace, Clytemnestra raises a cry of triumph, hearing about the war. The heart within them screamed for all-out war. Like vultures robbed of their young, the agony sends them frenzied. Soaring high from the nest, round and round they wheel. They row their wings, stroke upon churning, thrashing stroke. But all the labor, the bed of pain, the young are lost forever. Yet someone hears on high, Apollo, Pan, or Zeus, the piercing wail these guests of heaven raise, and drives out the outlaws late, but true to revenge, a stabbing fury. Wow. What do you make of the opening lines of the chorus? Yeah, well, James.
I'm not sure this really says what I make of the chorus, but the first place I would start with the chorus is who they are, because I noticed as I've read ahead a bit, the chorus changes across these plays. Right. So here the chorus is the old men of the city.
Good.
So right. In fact, I noticed that they're kind of looking to the past here. They're talking about, the history of the family a bit and sort of past context that they're bringing up here. Yeah.
Good, very good. James, those are really good comments for all of us to take in. One of the questions you always have to ask is, what is the role of the chorus in this play? What we're going to see in this trilogy that we're looking at is the chorus is going to change. So don't expect the chorus to be the same from play to play. but instead ask, what is the role of the chorus in this play? And here we have a good start, as James has said, right? The chorus is giving us a little bit of the emotion that's going on in this, the expectation of the return of Agamemnon, but also they're giving us something of the past as well. Yeah, Bonnie, come on in.
Well, I'm further down. I don't know if it's a comment, if they're making a comment on the war or the comment on Clymestra wanting to revenge her daughter's death, but when they say, but all the labor, the bed of pain, the young are lost forever. I don't know if that's referring to the war or if that's referring to the sacrifice.
Good, right.
I took it as the young men of Greece. I don't know if that's
But
correct.
then it had the labor. I just thought of labor and bed of pain.
Yeah, I was thinking the same thing too. And then I thought, well, I don't really know, so I just kind of stuck the men of Greece in there.
Okay, Joseph, go ahead.
All right. Now, a warning, I've read all three of the plays, so I don't want to get in the way. But the final passage is important in the context of the Eumenides in particular.
So you're saying the final passage of all three plays, the last passage of Eumenides?
The final passage of this chorus.
Oh, okay, good.
Where it says, yet someone hears on high Apollo, Pan or Zeus, the piercing wail these guests of heaven raise, and drives the outlaws late but true to revenge a stabbing fury. So I probably shouldn't say what happens, but a theme is that some of the actions of some of the actors are driven by the gods. And here you have that being said explicitly.
Good.
Apollo, Pan or Zeus seemingly driving the outlaws, driving someone to commit an illegal act. And then the reference to revenge. So there is a theme of further revenge happening into the future, I'm taking that as.
Oh.
So we know of the revenge of Clytemnestra as against Agamemnon over the daughter, but we have a cycle of revenge continuing in the future. That's referenced here. And then the reference to the stabbing fury. And the furies obviously become more and more important as the plays go by.
Notice that fury is capitalized. So that's telling us something. This is not just human emotion, but this is part of the myth, part of the mythology of ancient Greece. So, by the way, the Greek word for the Furies is the title of the third play, the Eumenides. So what are the Furies? We'll have to look at that. But clearly, it is not just an emotion, but fury is an acting agent in the play. And I think that's part of what Joseph is getting at, but true to revenge, a stabbing fury. Now, I think we can limit ourselves to this play, right? That is, revenge is Clytemnestra's, a stabbing fury. Go ahead, Joseph.
Just a really quick about the Furies. I think I've seen some paintings over the years where you have the Furies. There's one that I remember, but I saw it before I had studied any of this. But I think it comes to mind of a ship and presumably going across the Aegean Sea. And there's all of these women with a bit of flying around the ship, about a dozen or so of them, just causing chaos.
Very good. Joseph, you've been giving us references to artwork several times. do you, and I was thinking about that, and I don't think I wrote them down. You referred to, a couple. Was it in another quarter, or was it with Herodotus?
It was Gorgias with the standing behind the pillars, and there was the marriage market.
Right.
And there was this. But often when you go to Wikipedia, you see them. But that last reference, I'm pretty sure I just saw in an art gallery in Melbourne. But I am not holding myself out as any kind of art expert. I haven't studied art or anything. This is just a few anecdotes.
Yeah, very good. Again, a reference to one of those things y'all see online somewhere. That Wikipedia thing. I'm gonna have to look at that one of these days. Sorry, I'm bringing out my little Kentucky accent here a little bit. Doris, I'm sorry, you wanted to come in on some of this.
You know, one of the things here in the chorus, and I can't find quite where it is, but they do, and it relates to the Fury. You know, I did read the introduction to this book, to the place and so forth, but it's just alluded to very briefly in this play regarding this son. You know, they had other children in addition to Iphigenia and the other two, but the son, Orestes, and it alludes to that at one point in here about the son being gone and not having been in the war.
Right. So Orestes is the son that we're talking about. He's too young for the war, but he's also been gone from Argos. Do we know about his history at all? Does this play tell us something about his history? Doris, go ahead.
It really didn't say, and I didn't know if maybe Clytemnestra had him banished or sent him away.
Right.
You know, I couldn't discern from what few lines were in this play why he was not in Argos.
Right. Yeah. Karen, go ahead.
Well, and when he does show up in the next play, he is a grown-up. So I expect Clytemnestra does not want him there, because then he should be king. He should be in charge, not her and her lover.
Oh, the plot thickens here, Karen. So wait a second. So what you're suggesting, Karen, is that Clytemnestra, does this give us a little bit more content to the watchman's comment that she maneuvers like a man? So is she plotting and scheming in order to preserve the throne of Argos for herself?
Yeah.
Go ahead. And then, go ahead, Doris.
Yeah, I think so, because again, going to the top of 104, where he says that the house is no longer run like the great palace of old. She clearly has made changes, and, you know, and then later on where I saw the mention of the son, you know, to me, he's been banished. He's been sent away so that he doesn't see what's going on in the palace.
Yeah, very good. Karen, go ahead.
Well, and that kind of also changes, I never thought about that before, but it does sort of change the situation. Like, Agamemnon did what he needed to do to retain his leadership role, and she was so mad about it, but now she is, you know, depriving her own son of his rightful place. So that gives her less of a leg to stand on.
Yeah. Does that even bring it to raise this to our questioning, to even questioning what her motivations are for killing Agamemnon? is she really upset about Iphigenia? I suppose she still could be, right? She could be. She could be upset about Iphigenia. Maybe that's part of her. That's part of her revenge, is to actually take the household away from Agamemnon because of the killing of Iphigenia, and even his offspring. Go ahead, Doris.
Yes, but I also see her relationship with Augustus as, you know, it's been 10 years. It doesn't, wasn't able to figure out how long he had been there, but I think he fed into that. She may have been upset over the killing of the daughter, but then he wants to, make the claim on why he is the rightful king, not Agamemnon, and Clytemnestra needs to work with him to avenge the killing of his father. It would be his brothers.
Yeah, Karen, go ahead.
Well, and I mean, I never ever thought of this before, but I mean that would be part of her reasoning. But in Greek society, even in Aeschylus' society, and certainly in Agamemnon's society, depriving your male heir of his inheritance would probably have been looked at as worse than sacrificing your daughter. And
yeah, that's right. Oh, okay. It's really bad. I'll go with you there. Is it worse than sacrificing your daughter? I don't know.
I mean, not to us, but
right. That's right. To that culture, right? So why don't we talk about this? I mean, we only have a few minutes left. What do you pick up from the play about the sacrifice of Iphigenia? Try to limit ourselves to this play. Doris, go ahead.
Well, I think it was expected. I mean, that in order to get the winds blowing again, they needed to make some sacrifice, and this was the standard sacrifice, if you will. And so it almost was, he didn't have a choice. This is, as the leader of the expedition, the leader of all the warriors, this is what he needed to do.
Yeah, he's between a rock and a hard place, huh? James, go ahead.
Yeah, he is, but what comes very soon after what we're looking at on like 104 is there's a very long chorus recitation, and it goes all the way on and past page 11, and there on page 111, the chorus is describing the sacrifice of Iphigenia, and it's just heartbreaking. I mean, that's not just like a cold calculation. It's like, okay, got to get the army off. Well, kill a daughter, off you go. I mean, this is just heartbreaking on 111.
It really is.
When she's sacrificed. Yeah.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the top of the page. Mm-hmm. My father, she might pray to the winds. No innocence moves her judges mad for war. Her father called his henchmen on with a prayer. Hoist her over the altar like a yearling. Give it all your strength. Fainting, lift her, sweep her robes round her, but slip this strap in her gentle curving lips. Here, gag her hard, a sound will curse the house. Ay, this is horrible. It's hard to read. It breaks your heart. But James, are you saying that it was unnecessary that he had an alternative?
I don't know if that makes it unnecessary. It's just really bringing out the cost. Maybe just how awful a sacrifice it really was. I'm not sure what it says about the necessity, but maybe just the size of the price that was paid.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Joseph, you want? Yeah, come on in.
Just a counterfactual type of new thing to introduce here. Often when characters do this sort of act in in different plots, like it happens in Game of Thrones. There's a scene where one of the main characters sacrifices his daughter in basically exactly the same way. And we see it in other situations where someone does an immoral act, and after they've done it, they don't come back from it. They lose part of themselves. But that doesn't seem. I'm not sure if that's the case with Agamemnon, whether he does or doesn't lose part of his. He doesn't come back from it.
Yeah, it's a really good observation and a question, really. I think there's a question implied in what you're saying. What effect does this have on Agamemnon? Doris, go ahead.
Well, and if you look at it, he was driven by the need to sacrifice to the gods in order to move the ships and all the warriors forward. But this whole thing started because, no, not the war, but
right.
the avenging of Clytemnestra and Aegeus is because of the way Atreus took his brothers, Thyestes' children. And we don't have that same kind of, he just did that just for meanness to get back at him, like, I'm the king, you have to be subservient to me. Where in this instance, Agamemnon was doing it as something that he felt needed to be for the gods, but there was no really reason for Atreus to kill Thyestes' children and feed them to him. And we don't have a vivid description on how they were killed as we do here.
Yeah, I think that elsewhere we read about them being cooked and boiled and fed to the family. And, asking, well, how was your dinner? It's gruesome. It's almost comical. If it weren't so gruesome, I think it would be comical. Okay, maybe if it was your cat or something, I don't know. Sorry for any cat lovers. I didn't mean that. Karen, maybe you can have the last word here.
Oh, well, I just back to Joseph's point about, did he carry it with him? I don't think we get any evidence one way or another, but that if you go back to 205.
Line 205, yeah.
Yeah, and the chorus is saying, I can hear the older warlord saying, and that's Agamemnon, I think, obey, or a heavy doom will crush me. Oh, but doom will crush me once I rend my child. So.
Right. Yeah. So what you're saying is he is affected by it.
But 10 years later.
Yeah, okay. Joseph?
A much better example of a person carrying it with them is the main character in Crime and Punishment. After he did the evil act, he didn't come back from it.
Yeah, right. Very good. And there was
the redemption aspects.
Right. Yes, that's right. And the only healing that he finds is through redemption. Yeah, interesting. Okay. Well, listen, it's a good start. We're out of time. For next time, let's do this. Let's focus on how the play works. So we've done a lot with the context this time. But for next time, let's focus on how the play works. What's the drama within the play? And, with those kinds of things, we think of all the normal things of literary analysis of plot and character and climax and, all of those kinds of things, scene and symbol, all that kind of stuff. Work with all of that, and let's really talk about how the play develops and what are some of the ideas. Yeah, Karen.
So how were these performed, though? Were they performed all in a row, or 3 nights in a row, or one a week, or?
These 3 plays?
Yeah.
Yeah. Remember, the plays are always a part of a competition. I do not I don't know for sure. I can't remember. At one point, I did look into it, whether the 3 plays were written intentionally as a trilogy. Did anybody look into that? Yeah, James, go ahead.
Well, in a little bit of the introduction, I think it's Robert Fagles gives us the sense that they're written for the festival of Dionysus, and talks a little bit about what that brings to it, that, you know, who Dionysus was and what it would mean to do these stories, perform them. So from that, I get the sense that it was, I don't know how long the festival was, but I think of it like a long weekend kind of a thing, right? And we're gonna binge on these plays kind of a thing. So it seems to be focused around one particular event, whether or not that's all in one year or if it's a recurring festival over multiple years, but it has that focus to it.
Right, and also they were not written in this order. So the way that we're reading them is not the order in which Aeschylus originally wrote them. Doris, go ahead. Unmute.
Also, it said in the introduction that there was a 4th one, but that has not survived. And it was the one written at the end to bring a little lightness to the whole, to the whole bundle of plays.
Right, to bring some lightness to the heavy tragedies that we're reading. Yeah. Karen, last word for sure. Then I got to give you all your break.
You guys, did you think that introduction though was like almost impossible to read?
I
literally was falling asleep while I was reading it.
Well, I thought if the play is going to be as hard as the introduction, I'm in trouble.
Yeah. I would like to say,
you know, it's the work of scholars. You know, they're speaking to, you would think they'd be speaking to the common reader, but, you know, they're bringing all their scholarship to bear and showing their armor and all that kind of stuff.
I would like to say one thing.
Nicholas, yeah, go ahead.
In the beginning, I told you I did a lot of tabs, and I think that I did it just to find where my place was. But perhaps in future classes, you could put out on the Canvas site a slight introduction that you might want a person like myself who has a limited amount of knowledge in this area. My background is mostly math and science, engineering. So this for me is a completion of what I didn't get when I was going to college. So
very good.
It would be really helpful.
We'll talk about that a little bit next time. That's actually a big topic in the basic program curriculum. And the topic, the issue there is, do we learn from the works themselves, or do we have, you know, sort of introductory, summary, critical kind of material that gives us some analysis before we even read the work? So we can talk about that a little bit later. But anyway, so I need to let y'all have your break before your next class. Thanks for coming. Good to be with you all. We'll see you next week.
Thanks, Stephen.
Bye.
Okay, bye-bye.
Hi, Bonnie.
Hi, how are you?
Okay. And yourself?
I can't complain.
Mm-hmm. Ow. For me, this is a great week because it's the first week in a month that I haven't been sick. So.
Oh, there's so many things going around. It's crazy.
Yeah. And
I'm glad you're feeling better.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah. Oh, here's Nick. Okay. So have you started the Oresteia?
Yes,
Bonnie?
today.
Yes.
Oh,
Today.
Okay. Are you going to have just one on Agamemnon or a couple classes?
2.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So 1 more on it.
Okay.
I'm enjoying it.
Yeah. It's pretty dramatic.
An easier read than this chapter on justice.
Yes.
I was confused.
I went ahead and did a lot more on this. I had philosophy classes, oh geez, 50 years ago, but
Mm-hmm.
I got into a little more of the natural laws and stuff. I mean, it's just, I was going to ask you some questions about things later.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I went to St. Thomas Aquinas and,
In California?
No, I don't mean the university. I went to St. Thomas Aquinas, some of his.
Yeah. No, he picks up on
some of his
a
laws.
lot of,
yeah,
and expands what Aristotle says about law. Yes, absolutely.
I just was interested in that, and then I took it to especially when you talk natural law and political law.
Although you're going to read some Aquinas. You're going to read Aquinas on natural law. See where that shows up in the syllabus nowadays. It's one of my favorite texts that we do. It's in year 3.
Oh, okay.
So you spend 3 weeks on Aquinas' treatise on law, and then Locke and Kant. So,
Cynthia, do you know what in spring quarter what Shakespeare play we do for the tutorial?
I'm pretty sure it's Othello.
That's what I thought too.
Yes. I know that there were things printed that had it incorrect.
Right. If you look online, the syllabus shows that still has Macbeth.
Yeah, and that was in 2019 was Macbeth. I taught Macbeth last year in the spring. So I'm almost certain it's Othello.
Well, I thought that's what Zoe had said in one of the introductions, that it was going to be Othello this year.
Yeah, and Zoe would be right. So, yeah, and I'm going to be teaching that in the spring. I think not to you guys, but to another group. So it's a good one.
Well, maybe next week when registration's open, they'll have the
correct
info.
Yeah, for sure. Welcome, Curtis and others. Yeah.
Can you see me?
Yes, Karen. Yep, we can. Yep. Yeah, and James and Joseph is not yet visible, but let's see. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We got 8.
Doris?
Yes.
How did you Google the play with Greek actors?
You know what I did, I Googled Agamemnon, how did I do it? Agamemnon on YouTube. I can send you, what's your email address? I can send you the link.
Oh yeah. So they had some snippets from the play, or maybe the whole play on YouTube.
The whole play.
That's great. Yeah.
As they would in Greece with the masks and everything.
Oh, awesome.
And so it was, and they have all of all 3 plays on there.
Yeah. Oh, awesome. Yeah.
Doris, if you wouldn't mind, could you put that on the comments on Canvas?
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. And if you wanted to, you could put it in the chat. If you got the link, you could just cut and paste it into the chat to everyone.
I mentioned something about this just before we clicked off, that having taken only what was essential for engineering. I'm very shallow in liberal arts areas, so this is kind of completing my education. But much of this, I'm in the dark.
Mm-hmm. Well, you almost have to see it too. I mean, reading a play is just not the way it was intended, you know. So if you can see some on YouTube, that's great. Yeah.
I'm definitely going to go and do that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and start recording. So let's see. I guess it already is recording. I think it probably wasn't turned off from before, so they'll have to do a bit of editing. Cynthia Rutt's here, and this is the basic program first year tutorial on Aristotle's Ethics. We are in week 6, February 12th, and today we're looking at book 5 on justice. And next week we'll be doing book 6 on wisdom. So he said we're going to, this chapter is the last of the moral virtues, and he said now we need to approach the intellectual virtues. So that's where we're headed next. So part of what I think makes this, well, part of the reason we have a whole chapter on justice, remember that the last chapter covered at least 6 or 7 different virtues, is he said there's so many different meanings of justice. And I thought maybe we might start by just talking about in our own usage, what are some of the ways we understand justice, and why does it have, you know, so we can get a sense of the range of it, because he keeps having to say, I'm going to talk first about this part of justice, now about that part of justice. So what's one meaning that you can think of right off the top of your head? How do we use it? Just or justice, or the just person?
Fair.
Fair, okay.
Righteous.
Okay, so righteous, much broader than fair, right? Fair might be about games, or, right? You know, it was like that game was, you know, the whoever won justly. It was fair.
But also, I think fair has the implication of equal. Mm-hmm. I mean, my kids always used to say that, you know, that's not fair that you gave him.
Yes.
So I think fair actually, to me, is broader than just an economic.
Yeah, well, yeah, and kids are so concerned about it that some parents will actually literally count the number of Christmas presents, like, because the kids do. Like, I have to make sure I give 5 to Jimmy and 5 to Johnny and 5 to Alexa, because they're going to count. And they'll say, Alexa got 7. You must love her more. It's not fair. It's not just. Yeah. So that's one sense, is total equal distribution of something, gifts or honors or something. And then, as Bonnie said, righteousness is, you know, it becomes almost a much bigger sense of justice.
Or the legal sense. Yeah. The legal sense of justice.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what.
Go ahead.
As the grease that greases the wheels of any society.
Mm-hmm. Well, and he says that at one point. Yeah. No justice, no society. You know, it's that big. And who pointed out the legal? Was that you, Bonnie? That's where you're most likely to see a statue of justice, right? Is in a law court, in a Supreme Court building, blind, right? Often with a cloth across her eyes, with the idea, going back to Karen's, that she's going to decide things fairly. Doesn't matter who you are, what you look like, tall, fat, short, ugly. You know, supposedly justice is only going to care about fairness, not about who you are. Yeah, James, another sense of justice?
Yeah, sort of. I mean, as we're talking about it, it just occurs to me that we use that word just in another way. I'm thinking about, like, if you're word processing a document, you talk about justifying the margin. So to kind of line everything up just so, you know, is somehow connected to what is just and what is justified and what is justice.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Joseph.
Yeah, when I think of justice, I automatically think of legal justice, procedural justice. But I found it interesting when reading the chapter when it's about distributive justice. You know, what's a fair distribution of goods within society? And what I found interesting is that most of the people, when they were talking about their sense of justice, was about that sort of fair, giving people their fair share. But instinct is straight to legal justice.
Yeah, and he even, as you saw, he did just some math about that with the fairness, you know, the equal distribution on a line of this length, and if you take away some, you know, to add back in, and he gets almost mathematical with that sense of fairness and just distribution. Yeah. Well, that's, as you can see, the issue is that both for Greeks and for us, there are so many different meanings of justice that he feels like he has to deal with it in different ways in different parts of this chapter. So you can't just say justice, it's a mean between these two virtues. It's like, which kind of justice are we talking about? He gets into that a little in the very first chapter. So let's take a look at that. It's, you know, he gives a few attempts at definition. He gives the kind of the common one, and then he gives some others. And it's unclear whether any definition fits all of these different meanings that we've talked about. So in book 5, section 1, the second paragraph, he says, you know, gives maybe a possible first definition. He says, we see that all men mean by justice that characteristic which makes them performers of just actions, which makes them act justly, and which makes them wish what is just. But of course, that's not a real definition because it keeps using the word just to define justice, and we don't know what that is either. So he's not going to stick with that one. Then he goes a little later to a maybe more detailed or useful definition, and this comes around 25 in the margins. A paragraph that begins, now justice and injustice seem to be used in more than one sense, as we've been talking. Karen, would you pick up there at that paragraph? And you'll need to turn your mic on, sorry. There we go, okay.
Now, justice and injustice, Now, justice and injustice seem to be used in more than one sense, but because their different meanings are very close to one another, the ambiguity escapes notice and is less obvious than it is when the meanings are far apart, as it is, for example, if there is a great difference in external appearance. Thus, the word "kleis" is used ambiguously, both of the collarbone beneath the neck of an animal and of the key with which we lock a door. Let us then take the various senses in which we speak of an unjust man. We regard as unjust both a lawbreaker and also a man who is unfair and takes more than his share, so that obviously a law-abiding and fair man will be just. Consequently, just is what is lawful and fair, and unjust is what is unlawful and unfair.
Okay, let's pause there. That's more of a definition that doesn't use the word itself. So at least as a first crack at a definition, what do we think about that? The just is what is lawful and fair.
It assumes that the laws make sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I want to just expand on that as well. We saw that in Antigone, Creon's decree was what the law was. It was most unfair, which is to not bury the dead. Mm-hmm. So laws can be moral, and if they are, then they're not going to lead to fairness.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so this is a definition with some problems. You know, like Ismene, you could say, was law-abiding, right? She said, I'm not going to, the law says don't bury your brother, I'm not going to bury my brother. But I think, you know, Antigone would come back and say, but that law is not fair. Therefore, for me to break it is okay, because it's an unfair law. And so true justice is me burying my brother. That's me doing what is fair. Because we all know, and this might be, he gets into later laws that are natural versus laws that are conventional. And I think her claim contra Creon is it's, you know, natural law or divine law to bury your brother. So whatever your conventional human law says, I'm sticking with divine law because I think that's more important. So yeah, there can be disputes about laws and whether they're just and fair. And this is something Nick has jumped from Aristotle to Aquinas, who you guys will read in your third year. And the treatise on law that Aquinas, that we read in the program, he definitely says there's a criteria for law. being just and fair. And if it doesn't meet those criteria, it's perfectly fine to disobey it.
We also saw in Plato's, I can't remember which one, but when he's having his discussions about whether he should flee or not,
Yeah.
In that, he's having that discussion in the prison with, and his colleagues essentially telling him to break the law. And he, in fact, in that play says, he said, no, I should follow the law. So there's these contrary situations that are
Yeah. Well, and his friend thought that it was unjust for him to have the death penalty. And so he thought it was okay for Socrates to leave town. You know, he had bribed the jailer, had a boat waiting. It's like, let's go. And you're right. Socrates says, no, I stay here at the behest of the laws. You know, if I lived here my whole life and I obeyed all the laws up till this point, it would be wrong of me the one time the laws go against me to just leave town. You know, by staying in this state, I have consented to all its laws. And that means when a jury of my peers sends me to my death, I got to stay here and take it.
Yeah. But it struck me that he wasn't simply saying it's because the letter of the law, but because the law has this larger function, that it has this sort of, you know, bigger purpose in kind of creating a society of which he's a part. So it's very, you know, convoluted, all those pieces of it.
Yeah, no, and it's a good point. He doesn't cite any particular law. He talks about the laws in general. So I think you're right. He's more saying laws are what keep a state together. And if anybody, anytime a law they don't like it, just disobeys it, you don't have a society. And that's Socrates' view. Well, let's go on from here. This is not his final definition. And you know, as we've said, there are many aspects to law. It might only encompass one. Nick, would you pick up there? Very next paragraph, since an unjust man.
Let's see here. I'm sorry, I jumped ahead a little bit.
Oh, okay.
To try to stay ahead of you. Now justice and injustice seems to be used.
Oh wait, no, that's the part we read. So next paragraph begins, since an unjust man.
Oh, okay. Since an unjust man is one who takes more than his share, he will be concerned with good things, not all good things, but only those which are involved in good and bad fortune. These are things which are always good in an unqualified sense, but which are not always good for a particular person. There are things that men pray for and pursue, although they ought not do so. They should rather pray that things which are good in an unqualified sense may also be good for them, and they should choose what is good for them. An unjust man does not always choose the larger share. When the choice is between things which are without qualification bad, he chooses a smaller. However, since the lesser evil seems in the sense to be good, that since taking a larger share means taking a larger share of the good, he seems to be a self-aggrandizer. He is unfair, for unfair includes and is common to both, taking more than one share of the good and taking less than one share of the bad. Do you want me to keep going?
Well, I'm going to pause just especially on that last part. You know, he's as interested in exploring what do we consider the unjust man. So what about that you can be unjust or unfair both by taking more than your share of the good and less than your share of the bad? Can we think of examples of that?
Well, I think basically as a kid, you know, my mother, if I was going to split a candy bar with my brother and I didn't split it exactly evenly, she would make sure I didn't get the larger share. It's just the idea that it goes back to the common good, you know. You have to have it fair, and if it's not, then it's only natural that you want the larger share of the candy bar.
Well, and let's stick with your idea, a metaphor of the kids, that similarly, I'm guessing maybe with chores, right? That would be the share of the bad. I'm sure I'm sure sometimes, Karen, your kids have said, well, we both have chores to do, but his are way better than mine. He always picks the easy thing. You know, I have to go out in the rain and snow and take the garbage out. Yeah, go ahead, Karen.
I stopped that by making charts and rotating.
Oh, rotating. Okay, so this week you're on garbage. Next week he's on garbage. Okay, that's a good way. Yeah.
But it does, this actually, when I read this whole chapter, what I was thinking about more is my son's now grown up, and especially my youngest, who keeps telling me that any billionaire is, we talked about this a little in class last week, and then I've been talking about it with him this week. And this would be another justification of his point of view, that being a billionaire has to be unjust.
Because at some point you took more than your share of the good.
And you have a lot less of your share of the bad.
So, yeah. Would the rich be inherently unjust by this definition?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, Joseph.
I think that one is perhaps in some ways easier to explain, not by reference to what an individual do, but what societies do. So what we often do is shoulder the bad upon certain groups. So we may have shouldered, you know, slavery upon the blacks, for example. So I think we can point to many examples over the years where the bad things have been shouldered by the few, and that's been unjust.
Well, and in fact, you know, I'm trying to think, that was one of the arguments in the Supreme Court case about striking down the Jim Crow laws in the South, right? There was a lot of claims of, but it's separate but equal, right? It's fair because there are black water fountains and white water fountains, and there are black sections of the theater and white sections of the theater. And they had to argue in the court that somehow separateness was inherently unfair. Even though you both had water fountains, the fact that there were signs up indicated already that it was unfair, that one group was being singled out. But it was a hard case to make because as far as getting the, you know, both sides had the stuff. And they had to argue that fairness means more than just everybody has a water fountain.
Yeah, everyone has to have an equally good water fountain.
Yes. Yeah, and there was certainly some talk about whether the education was equal, whether, you know, seats in the theater were really equal. Yeah. Well, let's go on, because now he's going to give us a possibly revised or different definition of justice. Bonnie, you'll need to turn your microphone on a bit, but can you pick up there at since a lawbreaker is?
Since a lawbreaker is, as we saw, unjust and a law-abiding man just, it is obvious that everything lawful is in a sense just. For lawful is what the art of legislation has defined as such, and we call each particular enactment just. The laws make pronouncements on every sphere of life, and their aim is to secure either the common good of all or of the best, or the good of those who hold power, either because of their excellence or on some other basis of this sort. Accordingly, in one sense, we call those things just, which produce and preserve happiness for the social and political community. The law enjoins us to fulfill our function as brave men, for example, not to abandon our post, not to flee, and not to throw away our arms, as self-controlled men, not to commit adultery or outrage, as gentle men, not to strike or defame anyone, and similarly with the other kinds of virtue and wickedness. It commands some things and forbids others, and it does so correctly when it is framed correctly, and not so well if it was drawn up in haste.
Okay, let's stop there and talk about that. So this, he says, this is one sense of the definition of justice, is that it's the things that produce and preserve happiness for the social and political community. Is that a kind that we resonate with?
I think that up to a point it does. Politics, doesn't matter where you live, it affects us all. And in order to have a just society, we basically, we regulate our laws and change them through politics. So when something becomes unjust, if it's unjust to enough people, there's a group in society that will take that issue to task and go about changing it. Likewise, if something is needed that hasn't been established in the society, many of the things I'm talking about are of recent developments that came along with the advent of computers and automation and things that were not thought about, but somebody had to sit down and codify it, find out what society thinks about it. So at least to me, this is true.
Mm-hmm. Karen?
So I thought, yeah. To me, the whole thing is interesting about what size the body politic is, because my husband's from Holland. I lived there for 10 years. And they, their community is so much more homogeneous than ours, that and Athens would have been the same. It's a smaller community, and it's easier to make just laws for a group of people who are similar to each other. And I think in like America today, it's really hard to make just laws because there are so many different points of view.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to second what Karen said, because I'm daily in touch with cousins that I have in the Netherlands, and we spoke most recently over the impeachment proceedings. I got his views and what they're getting over there, but I think it's very easy for places like the Netherlands, Denmark, Sweden, Norway, Finland to make simpler laws, because, as Karen stated, pretty much everybody is the exact same as far as religion, race, that kind of thing. It's much more difficult when you bring it to the United States and try to make it work.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it is that question, who's included in the social and political community?
Right. I also just going to touch on this briefly. I lived for 10 years in Louisiana, and I don't know if most people know it, but Louisiana is under Napoleonic Code. Their state law is different than the rest of the United States. It didn't make sense when I went down there, but over the course of 10 years, it all of a sudden started to make sense. So I guess what I'm saying is this also applies to time and place.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, and as he points out, to who's making the laws, because he says the laws either aim to secure the common good of all, that's in a democracy, he points out later, or of the best in an aristocracy, or the good of those who hold power. So it might just be a tyranny or a oligarchy, and then the laws might be to help them maintain and keep their power. So, it depends on who's making the laws, whether they're really looking out for the good of the community or just for their own good. And with Creon, I know that was an issue. With, was he making a law he thought was good for the community, or was he just mad because there'd been a civil war and he wanted to punish somebody? Or did he really think that was the really best for the community? James, you had your hand up a minute ago.
Well, as we're talking about these things, I'm just struck by a couple of things we've read, and I'm realizing that there's a common move I keep seeing Aristotle make, and I think this is part of what makes my head spin as I read this. So, for example, up around 1129b3 or so, he says, well, there are things that are always good in an unqualified way, but wait, let me qualify that. And then he does that again a little farther down when he talks about laws. Well, laws are things that are good, but wait a minute, not all laws. Mm-hmm. So it's that, I'm not sure what to make of that yet, but I just see him doing that over and over. And I'm noticing that's what makes this, part of what makes this challenging for me to read, is that he makes these claims and then I don't know, I'm not saying he's backing off of his claims, but he seems to state things very simply. And then to talk about the complexity, I'm not sure where that leaves his simple formulation that he starts with. I mean, I'm hearkening back to, I guess, Socrates. Are we talking about beeness? Or are we talking about a swarm of bees? And I'm not sure. I'm not sure where he comes down ever. Whenever he makes this kind of repetitive circular move that he makes. So.
Well, and he does start talking about partial, the part of justice that is this. I'll talk about that here, but I'm temporarily ignoring all the other parts of justice.
Right.
So it's much slipperier, clearly, justice, than the other virtues that we've looked at so far.
Right.
And it's partly because we use it in so many senses. Yeah. And in fact, on the next, go ahead, Joseph, yes.
I was saying there's a good example of that in that paragraph we went through, where at the start he says everything lawful is in a sense just, and then at the end he makes the comment that the laws, that's the case if the laws are framed correctly.
Yes.
So if it's drawn up with haste. So it begs the question, if it's a hastily drawn law, like a reactionary political law, he's calling that law into question, but then on the other hand, he's saying everything lawful is just. There's a
well, and an example of that, I'm trying to think if it's not in Herodotus, that's in Thucydides. I think you'll read this, that because the Athenians, I'm not sure if this is true of the Dutch, Karen, but some of their decisions were by a group of the whole. All of the voting citizens would get together. And when they got mad, they would make some, as he says, hasty decisions. And there was a case where a city had offended them politically. I can't remember if they took sides in a war. And so the group of, 1,000 guys got together. They heard arguments back and forth, and they said, you know what, we should kill them all and sell the women into slavery. And so they sent, that was their decision on that day. And they sent a ship to go to this city with soldiers, to go kill them all. And then they thought better of it the next day. And some orators came and said, we're better than that. And that would be a big mistake, maybe just the ringleaders. And they were much happier with that decision, but they'd already sent the ship. So they sent a second ship and they paid them a whole bunch of money to go really fast and try to overtake the first ship. And by the time the second ship got there, they were already reading out the decree that was saying, all the men in the city are going to be slaughtered and the women sold into slavery. And the other ship got there and said, no, they've reversed it. So, there's an example of a democracy making, one law one day in haste and then repenting almost immediately. So yeah, what's justice in a case like that?
See you guys next week. Bye-bye.
Oh, so long, Joseph. Yeah. Well, let's leap to a different kind of justice. And so one of you alluded to this already, justice with regard to economic life. So we're now not in the realm just of the law courts, but in section 5, he talks about just action as reciprocity in the economic life of the state. So let's take a look at that. And we can, by the way, if there's things in the intervening chapters that you want to take a look at, we'll definitely come back to them.
You know what? I have a
Yeah.
question.
Yes, Doris, go ahead.
On where we just ended in
Okay.
the other one. So
Okay.
if we go to the top of page 114,
Okay.
the very first line, it says, this kind of justice is complete virtue or excellence, not in an unqualified sense. And then, justice is regarded as the highest of all virtues. But yet in what we read last week on high-mindedness, he had high-mindedness as the crown of virtue.
Mm-hmm.
So does that mean that complete virtue or excellence, that justice, you have to be just before you can be high-minded?
Yeah. Well, no, that's a good point. Let's look at this, what he says this is around 1130A. And this is a sense, I think one of you, it might have been Doris, said when we were just talking about how we use justice, we sometimes use it as righteousness, sort of an overall quality. And here he is talking about what people say, and he's quoting famous sayings about justice. You know, someone once said, in justice, every virtue is summed up, he says at 30. Now let's see if they found out where the quote is from. Theognis. So he's talking about the way we use the word, we often almost mean it as all virtues together. So if you are a just man, you are good, you are kind, you are true to your wife, you are, you know, all these other things. The just man is the good man. He also says at 1130a, a couple lines down, for the very same reason, and again, you always have to be careful with him. What is he saying he thinks versus what is he saying people in general think this? So we may not be at what he's thinking yet. So he says, for the very same reason, justice alone of all the virtues is thought to be. So again, not necessarily me, but people say it's the good of another, because it is a relation to our fellow men in that it does what is of advantage to others, either to a ruler or to fellow members of society. So, and in fact, based on that, I'm going to ask you a possible trick question. This will show if you got all the way to the last chapter. The last chapter is titled, Can You Be Unjust to Yourself? Is it possibly unjust towards oneself? What did you figure out his answer is? It's a yes or no, right?
I think he says no.
You're right, he says no. Again, as always, James, he qualifies it a little. He says, well, if you mean it in this sense, maybe. But really, the big picture is, and so going back to this, justice alone is the good of another. And I think his claim would be, if you're on a desert island, James, for 10 years, can you be just?
No.
You could be temperate. You could be, I don't know, I guess kind to animals, something. I mean, there's various of the virtues maybe you could practice. But he says this one, no. This is only for society. And do we agree with that? That other virtues, temperance might be good for yourself. You know, you're healthy if you're temperate or moderate. You know, if you're thought to be honest, maybe more people will buy your goods. So there's some element of selfishness to some of the other virtues, or it's good for you. This one, he says, it's only good for other people.
Well,
James?
I think in one sense, at least in common phrase that comes to mind is we don't think that now. I mean, we talk about people, don't be so unfair to yourself, right? If you say something like, man, I really should have seen that coming and I messed it up. And then if a friend is trying to counsel or console, they might say, well, don't be so unfair to yourself, you know? So there that applies more separation between one part of self and another part of self than Aristotle allows. Aristotle's thinking of self as more like a unity, I guess. Because he says you can't both take away and give to the same person and have there be a difference is his argument. So.
No, that's a good point. Although when I mentioned he qualifies it, that's the way he qualifies it. He says some people will talk about like you have different parts to yourself. So one part could be unfair to another part. Right. Yeah. So we may think a little differently about this now. But I think he does come down agreeing with overall with people that for the most part, justice is a virtue that involves other people. Maybe it's the virtue that involves other people. Cannot do it without them. A little later, he kind of says it's the glue that holds society together. But Doris, you were concerned that this passage is making justice sound like the height of all the virtues.
Right.
And earlier we talked about what was it? The high-minded person being the height of all the virtues.
Yeah, that was on page 95. It's at 1124a.
Yeah.
And he says, high-mindedness thus is the crown, as it were, of the virtues. Because it magnifies them and it cannot exist without them. So you would have to be just first, and then high-mindedness is the crowning thing. You know, I had trouble figuring out those two, you know, in comparing those two and what, you know.
Yeah, and are there some virtues that are kind of attached? Like if you're one, you're almost automatically the other.
Mm-hmm.
You know, does high-mindedness and fairness go together in some way? I mean, it did talk about high-mindedness as being correct about dishonor and honor and who deserves it and who doesn't. But mostly about yourself, you know, taking the honors you do deserve.
Right.
And not more than you deserve. Whereas this sounds like it's more with regard to other people around you. I mean, certainly mothers, as Karen's pointed out. The mom is that ruler who the kids are looking up to that better be just and fair in all these various ways, or they let you know about it.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. Well, now let's go on because we're still talking about society in chapter 5, but now we're talking about economics a little more than justice in the law court.
Wait, can I ask
Yes,
something?
yes, yeah.
So, all the other writers we've read so far have definitely talked about the gods or a god, whereas I'm not seeing any of that in Aristotle. And I was thinking, you know, our modern conception of justice is very influenced by Judeo-Christian beliefs. But so was Aristotle an atheist, or, I mean, does he mention the gods in other?
He does.
Writing?
Yes, but he's the origin. Many people will talk about the philosopher's God, because the way he talks about God is a little, and you get a little of this with Plato too, that they are kind of above it all. You know, we're not talking about Zeus and Hera and what they think. We're talking about the unmoved mover is one phrase that Aristotle uses for God. Well, an unmoved mover is not going to be listening to your prayers and answering them. It's just sort of a good existing out there in a sort of some kind of way that isn't very human. And you're right that he does not take the gods into account that often when he's discussing the virtues. He'll use them as an example, or, you know, now and then, but he is not deriving his virtues in any way from the gods. And even back in Antigone, that was part of the argument. You know, Antigone's saying, I follow divine law, and Creon's saying, I'm the ruler of this city and I make the human laws and you need to follow those. So yeah, Aristotle's kind of staying out of that debate involving divine law. As you'll see when you read Thomas Aquinas, he jumps right back into it. What's the relation of human law to divine law, and what's all that connection to natural law?
But I always feel like if people, especially sort of in philosophical discussions, do not mention God or gods, that they don't, it's just not a big thing for them.
Well, it doesn't have to mean that. I mean, I'm thinking about Socrates, for example. Remember, he's being charged with being an atheist. And he says, you know, a friend of mine went to Apollo and got this oracle. And the oracle said, Socrates is the wisest man in Athens. And I took it as my God-given duty to go around and see if that was true. Now, some people will say, oh, come on, you're a philosopher. Your only God is reason. And to this day, there are philosophers who will argue that. He did not believe in religion. His only God was reason. And then others who say, no, I'm taking him at his word. He thought it was his God-given mission to go and find out if Apollo's oracle was correct. So it can be hard to tell sometimes, I think, with philosophers, whether they're leaving God out of it because they don't need, you know, God for this part of their argument, or whether they're actual atheists. And even Socrates' fellow citizens disagreed about that one. Right. So Aristotle, you may remember, when he got in trouble, left the city. I don't know if you heard this bit of his autobiography. And he said, lest Athens sin twice against philosophy. He was not going to stay for a trial. I'm just going to leave town. I saw how things turned out for Plato. So, yeah. Okay, well, let's go on. But I'm glad you pointed that out, Karen, that in a lot of the readings you have read and will read, the gods come into it when we're talking about justice, but not for Aristotle. He's kind of leaving them out of it. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at 5. Joe? would you be willing, you'll need to turn your mic on, to read at the very beginning of section 5.
Some people believe with the Pythagoreans that the just in the unqualified sense is reciprocity. For the Pythagoreans used to define the just without any qualification as suffering that which has been done to another. Now, reciprocity corresponds neither to just action as distribution, nor to just action as rectification. And yet people interpret even Rhadamanthus' rule of the just in this sense. If he suffers what he committed, then justice will be straight. For there are many cases in which reciprocity and the just are not identical. For example, if a magistrate while in office strikes a man, he should not be struck in return. And if someone strikes a magistrate, he should not be struck in return, but should, in addition, be punished. Moreover, there is a great difference between voluntary and involuntary action. Keep on?
Yes, yes.
But in associations that are based on mutual exchange, the just in this sense constitutes the bond that holds the association together. That is, reciprocity in terms of a proportion and not in terms of exact equality in return. For it is in the reciprocal return of what is proportional to what one has received that holds the state together. People seek either to requite evil with evil, for otherwise their relation is regarded as that of slaves, or good with good, for otherwise there is no mutual contribution. And it is by their mutual contribution that men are held together. That is the reason why the state erects a sanctuary of the graces in a prominent place in order to promote reciprocal exchange. For that is the proper province of gratitude. We should return our services to one who has done us a favor, and at another time, take the initiative in doing him a favor.
Okay, so let's stop there and talk a bit about what he means by reciprocity and whether it's the same as justice.
In simple terms, he seems to be arguing as a general rule in favor of something like an eye for an eye.
Although he says that's not always going to work, right? If someone strikes the magistrate,
he makes exceptions.
Yeah, that it's not the case that then you strike him back and now we're even. But that no, there needs to be a court case, and maybe, you know, a battery is charged, and you know, there's some punishment. Maybe you go to jail for striking the magistrate. So then he gets into this question of, so not equal, but proportional. Yeah, Joe, did you want to comment on that?
On proportionality?
Yeah.
I mean, I was struck reading all of these passages with how hard he's trying to make this look like a geometry or math problem.
You're right. And the next paragraph, it becomes a math.
Rather unsuccessfully, I thought. But.
Yeah, it becomes pretty clear pretty soon. He's really talking about exchange of goods, among other things.
Yeah.
Like, you know, the little diagram he makes on the next page is, you know, the builder needs shoes and the shoemaker needs a house. So they got to work out, how many shoes do I make you for you to build me a house? And that's part of this reciprocal exchange he's talking about. That's the basis of society.
Right.
So it isn't, equality is not quite the right word. I mean, how many shoes equals a house? You know, it's a negotiation. This builder asked this many, you know, maybe you go around, that's why we get bids, right? Ask 2 other builders, maybe you can find one that will build you a house for fewer shoes. But why is this for him the bedrock of society then? This is the bond that holds the association together. Reciprocity, that kind of justice.
Well, I mean, it seems to me that he's saying that you have to be in a society, you have to be able to count on those other people that you encounter treating you fairly and returning good for good or bad for bad, and that general notion is what keeps the society functioning.
Okay, so not just in the law courts, but also in the market.
Yeah.
Although, of course, the market could end up in the law courts. So, you know, we make a deal, Joe, let's say you're the builder, I'm the shoemaker, you know, you're going to build me my house for 100 pairs of shoes. And then you build me the house, I've only delivered 50, and I say, we're done.
Yeah.
And then you got to take me to court, and hopefully you've gotten a contract to say, no, the deal was 100 shoes, you've only made me 50. And there needs to be recourse to that, and there needs to be a mediator who's going to, you know, agree that you got to stick with the original agreement. And according to Aristotle, if there isn't, you don't have society.
Yeah.
So how come we're suddenly talking economics? I don't know if we would have on our own assumed that a chapter about justice was going to end up talking about shoemakers and builders cutting deals for exchange of goods.
I think it was easy for him to use it as an example, since everybody, even back then, would realize it.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And Doris? Yeah, Doris, you're going to have to put your mic on.
You know, I think it was, you know, he was talking about equalizing, you know, the reciprocity. It's based on, you know, this individual, you know, may deserve more, have a higher standing, and things have to be equalized based on the quality and quantity, so that, you know, the house is much larger and much more important than the shoes. And so how do you equalize? How do you determine? And you know, that's what, you know, to me it was, that's what makes society run, is that, you know, things are being done and equalized, you know, in a certain fashion.
Mm-hmm. Okay, go ahead, Karen.
Well, I'm just wondering, now that we're talking about money.
Yeah, pretty quickly he gets to money, yeah.
Yeah. So Athens would not have considered itself a capitalist economy.
The word didn't exist yet.
Right, but
yeah.
Because this is relying on that the shoemaker is actually going to get a fair price for his shoes. Mm-hmm. As well as the build, you know, assuming that the builder is much wealthier. Mm-hmm. And that nowadays is certainly not always true. I mean, look at what we pay teachers, for instance.
Well, and let's talk about how he gets there. And you're right, money is a part of it. So this is at 1133A15. You know, he says for a community, I'm just going to read that last line and then I'll have one of you read the next paragraph. So it's the last line of this lengthy paragraph where he introduces the shoemaker and the builder. And then he says, for a community is not formed by two physicians, but by a physician and a farmer, and in general by people who are different and unequal. But they must be equalized. And hence everything that enters into an exchange must somehow be comparable. And then this is where we get money. James, would you read the next paragraph?
It is for this purpose that money has been introduced. It becomes, as it were, a middle term, for it measures all things, not only by their equality, but also by the amount by which they exceed or fall short of one another. Thus it tells us how many shoes are equal to a house or to a given quantity of food. The relation between the builder and shoemaker must, therefore, correspond to the relation between a given amount of shoes and a house or a quantity of food. For if it does not, there will be no exchange and no community. And the relation will not be the same unless the goods are somehow equal. Consequently, all goods must be measured by some single standard, as stated earlier, and that standard is, in fact, need, which holds everything together in a community. For if men were to require nothing, or were not to require things equally, there would be no exchange, or not the same kind of exchange. Now, money has, by general agreement, come to represent need. That is why it has the name of currency. It exists by current convention, and not by nature, and it is in our power to change and invalidate it.
And just the first sentence of the next paragraph.
Thus, reciprocity will be attained when the terms have been equalized, and when, as a result, the product of the shoemaker is to the product of the farmer, as the farmer is to the shoemaker.
Okay, let's stop there. So he has turned it into something of a math problem, but behind it, is there some, can we detect something he's trying to say about society and when you can have it and when you can't? More than once he says, if you don't have X, you don't have society. All goods must be, where would he last say that? If men were to require nothing or not require things equal, there would be no exchange and no kind of exchange.
I think that's a very true statement.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's the basis of pretty much all societies. And I'm going to take a leap here, but I would even say in a socialist or communist society, there still has to be a certain amount of
Reciprocity.
Reciprocity, right?
Okay.
I
Doris?
mean, you've got to give something if you're going to get something.
Doris?
In I don't know if it's in a chapter we already read or if it's one coming up, but he talks about you can't live by yourself. You can't, a person can't exist by themselves. They're always dependent on other people because you couldn't manage, you couldn't make all of the things that you need, and it gets around to the word need. If people need each other, and for a society to work, and to have a society, you live among other people and you all bring something else to the table, something unique to the table, or and so it's that need, what I need from, you know, person X and person Y, and they need, you know, product seed from me. So it's that collective need of all individuals because you can't exist by yourself.
Mm-hmm. And what's the role of gratitude? You know, earlier he said, this is why, and this is his fanciful maybe idea of why states have statues of the graces in prominent places, 1133A, that paragraph. He says, because it's the proper provenance of gratitude. We should return our services to one who has done us a favor and at another time take the initiative in doing him a favor. And I gather he's saying, and if that doesn't happen, society's going to break down. So need, you're right, Doris. He also says, if you need, you have to have need for society to work. What about gratitude? Why does he bring that up? There's a linguistic link between the graces and gratitude that we kind of have a bit of it. Charis, or charity, is the word the Greeks would have recognized. And this is maybe back to Karen's point of, would they have considered themselves a capitalist society, maybe by modern definitions of capitalism? It kind of sounds like Aristotle's saying, you need more than that. Now, it can't just be, I give to you, you give back to me. As long as it's all equal, we're good. But there actually has to be a sense of gratitude about the whole thing. And that doesn't sound necessarily capitalistic. Yeah, Nick.
Is he meaning that in every transaction in a given society, a person must feel a certain amount of satisfaction and gratitude that you, geez, I can't. Is this one of the intangibles? In other words, you've paid a price.
Mm-hmm.
Are you satisfied that you got exactly what you said you were going to get? Or were you expecting more, or were you expecting less? In any type of negotiation in modern times, both parties have to feel a certain amount of gratitude.
Well, and you're giving an example of, and if they don't, you've got trouble.
Right,
so
right.
If people are, yeah, so if you've got a society that maybe was working, but something's changed and now people walk away from these transactions always feeling duped, just feeling like I didn't get fair price there. I didn't, that didn't. And if they feel that constantly through various transactions, it could damage society if everybody is constantly dissatisfied and feeling like they've been duped. Yeah, Karen.
Well, I wonder, are you supposed to feel, does Aristotle think that you should be feeling gratitude towards your partner in the transaction, or towards the city and the laws, or towards the races, or, I mean, who are you supposed to be grateful to?
You know, the example he gives, and we'll go back to me and Joe. So Joe built me a nice house. I gave Joe some shoes. And he said, we should return our services to one who has done us a favor, and at another time take the initiative in doing him a favor. So maybe I come to Joe because I need a house. You know, there's been an earthquake, my house is destroyed. So I say, Joe, you're a good builder. I'm a shoemaker. How many shoes will you take? I got to have a house. So I'm the one in most need. But the claim is that I should be grateful, and maybe another time, Joe might approach me with a need, and I should be willing to fulfill it because he helped me out. I mean, it sounds like it's the one who gave us services that we need to be grateful for, according to Aristotle.
I was looking for, excuse me.
Yeah.
I was looking for something like mutual satisfaction.
Yeah, I wonder if satisfaction works better. If we feel like, no, you don't need to be grateful, but you need to feel satisfied. But then he does say at another time, you're going to take the initiative and do him a favor.
So is this getting at sort of the willingness to be in community where exchange can happen, as opposed to being really distrustful, to think like, oh, I'm always getting ripped off, so therefore you're much less open to interaction and exchange? But if you carry a sense of gratitude about your community, I could see that just kind of making the social wheels easier to turn.
Yeah. And so now this is, you know, I mean, and we can think of examples where that has fallen apart. You know, societies that for whatever reason, these exchanges become very unequal. And there's a segment of the population that is feeling constantly duped and tricked and worse off in every exchange. And they try not to have exchanges, but out of need, you're going to have to. And pretty soon you get a divided society.
I have a question to pose. Would you say that would be, well, I look at it as a proper observation, but in any given society, wouldn't that a necessity happen?
I think he's saying yes.
Because there's never been a society that I've ever read about that was utopian to the point to where everybody was satisfied all the time. There's always somebody on the bottom, you know.
Well, let's go to the end of this chapter, because he kind of gives a summary of the various kinds of justice he's dealt with up to this point. This begins at 1130. Well, it's the next page from where we're looking, 1134a. but really the paragraph that begins right above that, where he says, "We have discussed what the just and the unjust is." Let's see, Doris, would you read for us?
We have discussed what the unjust is and what the just is. Now that they have been differentiated from one another, it is clear that just action is median between acting unjustly and suffering unjustly. The one is having too much and the other is having too little. Justice is sort of a mean, not in the same way as the other virtues are, but in that it is realized in a median amount, while injustice belongs to the extremes. Moreover, justice is that quality in terms of what we can say of a just man, that he practices by choice what is just, and that in making distribution between himself and another, or between two others, he will not give himself the larger and his neighbor the smaller share of what is desirable, and vice versa in distributing what is harmful. But he will give an equal share as determined by proportion, and he will act in the same way in distributing between two others. Injustice, on the other hand, is a quality similarly related to what is unjust, and the unjust is an excess and a deficiency of what is helpful and harmful, and it violates proportion. Injustice is therefore excess and deficiency because it tends toward excess and deficiency, in one's own case toward an excess of what it is in itself helpful and toward a deficiency of what is harmful. In the case of distribution among others, although the rest is by and large the same, the violation of proportion may take place in either direction. Of the offenses, the lesser is to suffer unjustly and the greater to act unjustly. So much for our discussion of the nature of justice and injustice, and also of the just and the unjust in the general sense.
Okay, so this is the usual summary that we'd expect at the end of a discussion, right? But now we've got more books left, so we'll talk about what's in those remaining books. But now this is our summary of justice in the same sense we've seen with other virtues, where it's a medium between two extremes. And here the extremes are acting unjustly and suffering unjustly. So justice is the mean. And then at the bottom, he says, and as far as those two extremes, the lesser offense is to suffer unjustly and the greater to act unjustly. So let's talk a bit about what sense that makes. And you know, it feels to me like justice as a mean isn't quite the way it was with the other virtues. You know, you got courage, you got cowardice and recklessness, right? And he says courage is sort of closer to recklessness. You know, if you could rein in that recklessness more, you'd have courage. But justice is not a medium between two vices, at least not named vices. It's a medium between acting unjustly and suffering unjustly. Does that make sense to people?
I'm not sure if it makes sense to me yet, but how it strikes me as I kind of work towards sense is the suffering unjustly seems to be about self-directed things, and the acting unjustly seems to be about other directed things. So I wonder, putting that together, what this is saying is that the mean is poised a little bit more towards being outwardly directed, which kind of goes along with what we were seeing a moment ago about it's about community. So one way to say that might be, if you're always looking to give a little more than you get, then the community is going to be healthy and whole, I guess. If there's like an abundance of generosity, maybe, or at least a little bit of bias towards it, if that middle point is more about being careful not to act unjustly as opposed to being worried about getting slighted.
That's nice, and you brought generosity back in. But you know, it's partly about an attitude, and that it's better to accept a little injustice, maybe not get quite what you thought you deserved, in order to keep things running well. That if everybody's seeking exactly what they deserve all the time and always looking out for that, maybe things don't run quite as well. And do we still carry this idea of justice, that it's much worse to do an injustice than to suffer one?
No, that's deep, because in a modern sense, we've got a certain amount of recourse if we feel like we've been, if injustice has been done.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas I don't know if the same could be said for Aristotle's time.
Mm-hmm. Oh, Karen, sorry, you'll need to turn your mic on. Yeah.
I feel like we don't even have them on the same continuum anymore. Having an injustice done to you is being a victim.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas doing it an injustice is being a bad person.
Mm-hmm.
They're not exactly on the same continuum then.
Yeah, and that's what I mean by it doesn't feel like courage as a mean, you know, there's your cowardly man, you're acting too quickly, and then your courageous man in the middle. This is one person, and is it, you know, either doing wrong or suffering wrong. And somehow justice is, what is justice then? Suffering a little wrong, but doing no wrong?
The right amount to the right people at the right time.
Yes. But in proportion, right? Not necessarily equal.
Right.
Although that's hard to explain to kids, as Karen said. You know, yes, I gave your sister, you only got 2 presents, but one of them is a really expensive present.
Right.
And your brother got 6, but they're much smaller. They somehow they don't like that. They want to see 5 presents in everybody's hands.
And it seems to be easier to understand that continuum in a commercial sense.
Mm-hmm.
There is paying too much, and there's paying too little, and there's paying the right amount.
Mm-hmm.
And it's probably better if everybody pays a little too much, and then it feels bad. But when you start talking about, as we do in the next section, a political sense or other kinds of non-commercial interactions, it becomes, I think, more complicated to say that there is a median that can be identified where you are either slightly too generous or slightly victimized. I just think those are harder problems than did you pay enough?
Yes, yeah.
I'm still also going back to the, you know, Aristotle is assuming that the work of the shoemaker is valued, and the work of a house builder are valued along this sliding scale that is absolutely fair. But that's not generally how things actually work.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it takes away from his argument by not acknowledging that.
Mm-hmm. That builders are sort of higher socially than shoemakers. Well, he clearly wanted to pick 2 things where one big thing is worth many of the whatever the little things that the shoemaker makes are. And he certainly was aware that shoemakers are not, you know, high level in society.
And I mean, as in Athens, as today, I would assume that, you know, the shoemaker is going to sell his shoes at a discounted rate if his child is sick and he needs to pay a doctor. Whereas the house builder, there's less chance of that happening.
Mm-hmm.
So
you'd probably have a hard time finding a house builder that makes as much money as Nike does.
as what?
As Nike does.
The shoemaker,
On
Nike.
margin.
Oh, yes, that's very true.
Nike. I'm sorry. Yeah, I didn't catch that either. James. Thanks, James.
Yeah.
You're
Yeah, it
absolutely
depends on the shoemaker. You're right. Those are some expensive shoes Nike makes.
Right. Right. All right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, is it more for him, is the concern more that people, whatever their profession, feel like they can have a fair exchange of goods, and money is going to be part of what makes that possible, and that if they're not feeling like they can ever have a fair exchange of goods, he sounds like it would be a danger to society. You know, there's certainly going to be some interactions where it doesn't happen well. There's going to be, you know, builders who are not fair, who cut corners, right? Happens now. They agree to build X, Y, and Z, but then they use cheap materials and your house falls down, you have to take them to court. But is the idea that if overall people feel like they can make these exchanges, and if it doesn't work out, they can take it to the court and have a mediator work it out, then you've still got a society. But if you feel like that, it's hit or miss. You know, maybe today I can make an exchange, maybe tomorrow I can't. Maybe no one will buy my shoes because they don't like how I look or something. Then I can't be in this society. I either have to go find another or leave.
It
Yeah,
struck
Doris.
me.
Oh, sorry, Doris, then James. Yeah. Go ahead, Doris.
Yeah, you know, going back, he talks about the equal share is determined by proportion, but then earlier he did say that, you know, it has to be of the same quantity and the same quality, that the quality was important. So if a housemaker built a shoddy house, then the purchase price of that house will be maybe 50 pairs less shoes than what it would be if it was done of fine materials. So I think he's trying to make the distinction, you know, it has to be an equal share as determined by proportion, but also you have to maintain the quality of what it is you're doing.
Mm-hmm. Hence our desire to have the building inspector come through, right, before you buy. James, were you going to say something?
Yeah, in a somewhat similar vein, there's a lot of judgment in all of this, right? A lot of, you have to kind of look at it and then think it through, which maybe is why Aristotle is sort of privileging judges, really. I mean, on 124, he talks about it's a big deal to strike a magistrate. Well, let's not do that. So he's sort of privileging the magistrate. And then 2 pages before, on 122, he says, well, you know, really judges are the mediators. And that strikes me because he says then that's about finding the mean. It's about finding that right set point. So that role in society, it seems like he's saying, is really important. And it is about sort of having that discussion through this central figure who can kind of help us mediate or find the mean. And therefore, let's not hit him, I guess. Let's take care of him or something, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting, he doesn't bring up the fact that in Athens, your trial was going to be by jury. There wouldn't be a single judge. It would be your fellow, as you saw in the apology, it would be your fellow Athenians who are your mediators deciding. Yeah, Bonnie.
Well, he says in 1133b14, he states, therefore, the price of all goods should be fixed. For in that way, there will always be exchange. And if there is exchange, there is a community. But who's fixing the prices? I mean, how?
Yeah, this is where he and Adam Smith would part company, right? And you're going to read Adam Smith. No. You have to see what the market will bear. And one day it will be one thing and next year it'll be another, depending on scarcity of shoe leather and cost of building materials. Yeah. James, you're going to speak.
But I sort of read back on 126, 1133A30, that there is that flexibility in the price. Like we do have to set a price, but it is set by convention. It's not fixed by nature, but we have the power to change it. So I see that difference between what Smith might say, but I wonder how big that difference is, because there's still this negotiation in it.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to second James as far as I believe they probably had a, for want of a different word, mean for an exchange that would probably be the minimum, and that two people could, of course, make an agreement below or above that, however the transaction was. That's the way that I was looking at it.
Mm-hmm.
I also have a question about the proportionality, though. I mean, if the shoemaker has 5 kids and he's also supporting his parents, and one of his kids is crippled and whatever, and the house builder, has 2 kids and is doing fine, but Aristotle's formula doesn't encompass that at all in terms of justice. Whereas if I were making the laws, it would encompass that.
Mm-hmm. Well, and you might now be talking about justice at a higher level. Like, what is a just society? Is it a society in which a shoemaker has a minimum wage? So it's not about exchanges within members of that society, but it's sort of a bigger picture of justice.
Or Karen, does that come back to his point where maybe the housemaker will take the initiative in doing the shoemaker a favor and helping him out because of his situation?
There's where our gratitude comes in, maybe.
Yeah.
Well, let's go on a bit, because as I said, this sounds like a summary, but then we have 5 more chapters. So as you read this, what is the sense of justice that isn't covered here? I mean, we'll if we just look at the chapter heading, so we have justice in the political sense, and then that's subdivided into what's just by nature, what's just by convention. We get the various degrees of responsibility for just and unjust actions, and at least some of those, I think, feel like it's the legal area that we're in. Voluntariness, involuntariness in just and unjust action. And then finally, we get to the equitable. So are we now in the law courts in these next few chapters? Is that what he means by justice in a political sense? And certainly, as I say, that's where you're going to find statues of justice, right? You're not going to find them in the corn market. You're going to find them in the law courts. Doris, yeah.
I think it is. It's more in the courts, because as we go through this, he talks about the, giving back, that if somebody harmed you in some manner, they need to compensate for that, as well as you're reimbursed more because they have to endure some punishment for their bad treatment of you.
Mm-hmm.
And, he brings that up. So, to me, that's in the court. The judge is the one that passes the sentence for the individual that did an unjust act, and that they need to not, they have to endure some kind of pain, if you will, for their unjust act. So not only to replace or give back whatever was done, but then, some type of punishment for their action.
Yeah. Where are you reading, Doris?
Well, you know what? I'm trying to find where he had that. I underlined it here somewhere.
Okay.
But,
well, he does talk about, and actually he had talked about this earlier, so maybe we're actually in an earlier section. The judge as the one who's kind of restore equilibrium. I'm not sure if that's the part you were referring to. That's back in 4. Justice action as rectification. And maybe let's go back to look at that there. And then he expands maybe on the courts a little later. But this is where he's talking about something has happened, you know, somebody has stolen something from somebody.
Right.
And the judge's job, this is at 1132A5, is to restore equilibrium. When one man has inflicted and another received a wound, or when one man has killed and the other has been killed, the doing and suffering are unequally divided. By inflicting a loss on the offender, the judge tries to take away his gain and restore the equilibrium. That comes close to what you were saying, Doris, but not quite.
Yes, you know, that was it. And then he talks about the rectification also on 1137B, like 23.
Okay.
And you know, it's a continuation or of what you had just read on there, because I did have the, you know, the retribution for the wrong on
Okay.
the other. And so
Yeah. Now this is you've taken us to the chapter on equity and the equitable, right?
right.
With that 1137. Let's take a look at that one, because he says there's a difference between justice and equity. And equity is superior. So we're almost to the end of the section on justice, and now he's introducing this new thing, which he says is actually better. So let's pick up there. Who hasn't? Well, I think everybody's read, so we'll kind of go back and pick up. Karen, would you read again? Right at the beginning of that section 10. The next subject?
Yep. The next subject we have to discuss is equity and the equitable, and the relation of equity to justice, and of the equitable to what is just. For on examination, they appear to be neither absolutely identical nor generically different. Sometimes we go so far in praising a thing or a man as equitable that we use the word in an extended sense as a general term of praise for things in the place of good, and really mean better when we say more equitable. But at other times, when we follow the logical consequences, it appears odd that equitable should be distinct from the just and yet deserve praise. If the two terms are different, then either the just is not of great moral value, or the equitable is not just. If both are of great moral value, they are the same. These then are roughly the reasons why a problem about the equitable has risen. All our points are in a sense correct, and there is no inconsistency. For the equitable is just despite the fact that it is better than the just in one sense, but it is not better than the just in the sense of being generically different from it. This means that just and equitable are in fact identical in genus, and although both are morally good, the equitable is the better of the two. What causes the problem is that the equitable is not just in the legal sense of just, but as a corrective of what is legally just. The reason that all law is universal, but there are some things about it which are not possible to speak correctly in universal terms. Now, in situations where it is necessary to speak in universal terms, but impossible to do so correctly, the law takes the majority of cases, fully realizing in what respect it misses the mark. The law itself is none the less correct, for the mistake lies neither in the law nor in the lawgiver, but in the nature of the case.
Okay, let's stop there. And he's not giving us any examples, but I guess I was immediately thinking about parents. And then maybe we can extend it to the law courts. So since you've experienced this, Karen, I'll make you the mom. So you set down some rule for the kids, right? So universal law, no one can come in after 10 or, whatever the law is. And then someone breaks it. And rather than enacting the penalty, you learn about the circumstances, and you realize that either maybe you will enact the penalty, but you're going to make it soften it in some way, because given the circumstances, doing what you technically told everybody you were going to do every time this happened isn't right. Can you think of an example like that from your own child rearing where you set the rule, they broke it, but you had to go, well, given the circumstances, I think I have to not enact the full penalty in this case? Because he says that's the kind of situation in which it arises. It's technically they did wrong. So technically they should get the punishment you laid out. But, Doris, maybe you have an example?
Yes. So for instance, it's the deadline. You have to be in by midnight and they're out. And on the way home, the car breaks down. It has a flat tire. So they can't make it home by midnight. And so they've missed the deadline that was imposed, but there were extenuating circumstances.
Okay. So
yeah, but that's like a teenager. I'm having a really tough time coming up with one for small children. Can you think of one? And maybe that's not what you're asking, but.
Yeah, but I think that's a good example. Yeah, and he would say that the parent is being equitable then, rather than just saying, sorry, I said the first time you come in after midnight, I take away your keys for a month. And I got to stick with it because that's what I said. And it happened to your brother and I took his keys away for a month. So regardless of the circumstances, that's what I got to do. And I think that might be a case where you'd say, well, that's, just, but maybe it's not very equitable.
But the first law is actually not just. I mean, the first time somebody breaks their curfew, you take their keys for 2 days, and then the next time for a week, and then the next for a month. So I think any one of my kids could have made a really great case about how I was just being so unfair in that circumstance that it was completely not just.
But does this general sense of things make sense to us, that you can't always abide by the letter of the law, and sometimes the just is fighting with the equitable?
Yeah, that reminds me of what we saw many minutes and pages ago, where Aristotle says, well, the just is what is lawful. But let's talk about what is a correct law. It has to be framed correctly, right? So, and then he sort of, I think, either implies or says that there has to be some conversation and negotiation about that.
Well, and of course, in the case of parents, we're talking about them being the lawgiver and the judge, right? They set the law and they're deciding if you broke it. But around 25 on the next page, he talks about that when you are modifying something that doesn't go the way the law said, I'm trying to think where he says it's what the lawgiver would have agreed with. Yeah, I can't quite find it. I know he said somewhere. Yeah, oh, there it is. It's between 20 and 25. Such a rectification corresponds to what the lawgiver himself would have said if he were present, and what he would have enacted if he had known of this particular case. So now I'm back to you, Doris, that if you're the one who made the general rule, you might even add an addendum now, unless of course your car breaks down. That the lawgiver would agree that in certain cases, of course, don't apply this. And even though I didn't mention that particular case when I made the law, now that it's come up, of course I would agree that in that case, don't take their car keys away.
And that's exactly the way our legal system developed. We had courts of law and we had courts of equity. And the law judge could only apply the law, but the equity judge had the ability to take circumstances into account.
I didn't know that. I didn't know we had a separate system for equity.
Then we just decided that the same court ought to be able to do the whole thing. So distinction.
Oh, well, thank you for that. I didn't realize that. That we used to have the two parts. Here's the law, but now let's see if equity is needed. Okay. I realized, by the way, suddenly that we are at the end of our time. We're at 5:15, 5:17 actually. So depending on where you are. So we will need to end there. As I say, the justice is the last of what he calls the moral virtues. And next week, we're going to get into the intellectual virtues. So we will get his definition of wisdom and, know-how and savvy and all kinds of variations on knowledge. Given that we're in our, an election cycle, it's interesting to think about which of these we want our political leaders to have. What kind of wisdom or smarts or intelligence are we looking for? So that's for next week. I will see you all then.
Thank you.
Thank
everybody.
you.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye.
Bye.